I've got 5 o'clock.
Yep.
Is there a gavel over here?
No, yeah.
Ready, Matt?
Yep.
I'm calling today's meeting of the Patton Township Board of Supervisors, August 18th, 2021, to order. First item is announcement that the Board of Supervisors met in executive session with the Township Solicitor on July 29th, 2021, to discuss a personnel matter. Item 2 is the Pledge of Allegiance. If you're able, please join us in reciting the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Justice for all.
I'm just resetting my hearing aid here. Make sure I can pick up the loop. Okay. Next item is the introduction of new employees. Tyler, would you introduce our new police officer?
Certainly will. Clint, if you want to come stand, it looks like I'm maybe on this side of the podium so we can get you online as well.
Or just at the podium.
At the podium?
Yeah.
Okay. There we go. All right, we got you there. Okay. All right, so yeah, it's my pleasure to introduce Clint Haslam to the board, both here in person and online. Clint was hired as a police officer with our agency April 12th of this year. He grew up right here in Center County and holds an associate's degree in criminal justice from Lock Haven University. We're lucky he comes to us with 3 years of experience from Quakertown, Pennsylvania, where he worked for, like I said, about 3 years as a patrol officer there. He has successfully completed his field training program with our agency and has been doing a fantastic job on his own for about a month and a half now. He's currently working 8 p.m. until 4 a.m., so you probably won't see him too often unless you're out there in those hours. But we're really excited to add him to our team. So it's, like I said, my pleasure to introduce Officer Clint McCaslin to the Board of Supervisors.
Welcome, Officer McCaslin, to Patton Township.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, our next new employee is Sophie Weston, Communication Specialist. Doug?
Larry's time. Do you want to go ahead and introduce her, Larry?
Sure, I can do that. Sophie Weston began as our communication specialist in the second week of July 13th, I think was her first day. She comes to us from Michigan, the great state of Michigan, and she's a Michigan State grad, I believe, and she and her new husband, she got married, that's why she had a little delay in starting. She and her husband have moved into the area, and he is an employee at Penn State, and she is here helping us with starting off with our website, our social media, and is going to move through with press releases and such. She's already done a lot of work on both the website and the social media, and we welcome her here at the Patton Township.
Yes.
Welcome, Sophie.
Sophie, would you wave your hand? I don't, there you are, okay. It's not on my iPad, so I have to look up at the screen and see which block you're in there. Welcome, Sophie. We're happy to have you. I know we've been waiting for a communications person on staff here for quite some time, so we're very pleased. Larry, I will mention, this is really, doesn't need to be mentioned in public, but I noticed on the website when I looked at it that the homepage has a photo of the Patton Township sign in the building, and unfortunately, the Patton Township sign picture was taken before we power washed the sign. So the black streaks are from, that used to be there are still there. So if you would, please take a new photo and use that instead. Thank you.
Take care of that, no problem. That's an easy one. I thought you were going to say something about her being a Michigan State grad. I told her if she was a Michigan grad, we probably wouldn't have hired her.
Well, we're looking forward to a lot of great work and creative work and productivity now on our website. Thank you. Next item, public comments. This is an item where citizens who wish to address the board on something that is not already listed in the agenda, this is your opportunity to address the board, and please keep your comments to under 5 minutes. You have up to 5 minutes. Yeah, so introduce yourself and where you live.
Valerie Burnett on Toftree Avenue, and Doug, I think that I have a public comment that shows the images that I'd like to share.
Wasn't quite expecting you to come, so don't have them loaded up.
Okay. Well, first of all, it's a photo tour of.
I mean, they were provided to the board members.
Yes, I've seen it. They were provided to the board already.
Okay, and hopefully the general public will be able to see them too, to get a sense of what it looks like on the Bellefonte Rail Trail, especially during rain showers like we've had today. I did want to make a comment about how appreciative we were. I've had the opportunity now twice to contact 911, once for family issue in Allegheny County, and it worked excellent. I was just really thrilled how professional people were and how helpful. The second opportunity was the accident that occurred on the Bellefonte Rail Trail where the culvert was washed out. And not only was 911 super helpful, the officers who were really outstanding, paramedics, and even Toftree's golf resort got involved by offering a golf cart to help evacuate the person. So it was all very helpful, and Mount Nittany folks did a fantastic job also. I just wanted to comment on that. And I do have a petition that I wanted to share about the Bellefonte Rail Trail and American Rescue Plan money that I'll share with you at that point in the agenda. But one further thing I wanted to add in terms of engineering, a number of people did comment how thrilled they were with the improvements, to the point that they couldn't even remember how bad it was. And now it is working very effectively. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you, Valerie. And then personally, I'll also say I'm impressed at the amount of time you spend in counting people, which you have a passion for, and you have been supplying the board with results of your counts. I thought it was very interesting that we're talking about multi-hundreds of people that are utilizing that rails to trail, the 3 different sites where you were counting them. So thank you very much for that contribution. Any other public comments? Doug, Alex, do you see any other hands raised? Or
I don't see any hands, but I do see Mr. Mullins on.
Mr. Mullins, I see Pam waving, but not. Pam, did you wish to make a public comment?
No, I'm looking at CNET and I don't see any other picture. Is everyone seeing just that? I mean, I see the thumb photos across, but in the center where Larry came on, and I was able to see him in the center of the picture, but that's it. Now we just have a black screen that says CNET.
Pam, on the upper right, where it says View on your screen, click on that, and then click on Gallery, and you'll see everything.
Okay. All right.
Is that better?
better, but you know how when a person is talking, the picture, the bigger picture comes in the center.
Yeah, but everybody who's in the room here is gonna show up as CNET, because we're all working through their audio system, so.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, so that's why gallery view is probably better for a
Okay.
hybrid meeting.
great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pam. Again, any more public comments? Elliot? Yes, go ahead.
Wasn't sure when to mention this, but CVIM today started giving booster shots for the vaccine. I happen to get one because of a condition I have, but when I was there, an impressive visitor was at CVIM. Our U.S. Senator Bob Casey was there, and he was being shown the facility and was quite impressed with it. I was quite impressed that he chose to visit that facility during today.
Well, you were fortunate to be in the presence of a U.S. Senator while you got your shot, so congratulations on that. Yeah, my understanding, since I also volunteer there at Center Volunteers in Medicine, is that they're only giving booster shots to people who are immune compromised in some way. So they're not available to the general public yet. But I think from Washington, from our President Biden has indicated that they will be authorized sometime in September for anybody who's been vaccinated. If they wish to get a booster shot, they can.
Yeah, I think what I heard was 8 months after your second dose, then you would be eligible for a booster.
Right.
Stay tuned.
And we thank, I'm biased, obviously, because I volunteer at CVIM, but we're very happy that we have that facility, and they really stepped up big time to vaccinate the community in multiple of these big clinics, all-day clinics. Plus now you could get them in many places, including drugstores and Walmart and et cetera. Any other public comments? I don't see anyone raising their hand or indicating, so we'll move on. Next item of the agenda is number 3, presentations and public hearings, and the first item is the Penn State College Borough Report on Policing and Communities of Color. Do we have Mr. Cunningham with us, Doug?
Yeah, Dr. Cunningham is available, and he's going to give us a presentation. Dr. Cunningham, did you have a PowerPoint you wanted to share?
I do.
Okay, we'll give you permission there. You
Thank
go ahead and. Okay, you should be able to share your screen. There you go.
We see it now.
Yep, looks good.
All right, can anybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Sweet.
We can.
All right, well, good evening, good afternoon, good evening, good late day, if you will. Name is Dr. Cunningham, and I serve as the Director in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion for Finance and Business. I'm noticing that there's a bit of feedback coming through, and I'm not sure who and it's coming from. Am I just that loud?
It's not great on this end, but I think we're okay.
All right. So this is then going to be a presentation about the Task Force on Policing Communities of Color. Many of you will remember that it was previously started in, 2015, and the task force offered a 2016 report. And so this was a follow-up to that with everything that happened throughout last year. Before I get too far into the conversation, I want to acknowledge some folks who are on the screen right now, primarily Chief Jolly and Terry Watson, who are part of that task force, and thank you both very much for your contributions and your help in allowing us to ensure that we were able to get to this point. Let's see. So here is the charge, if you will. When we received the charge from both President Barron via the sort of news article, as well as then Senior Vice President David Gray, as well as Tom Plantain, the borough manager in State College, it was asking us to do a couple of things. One is looking at bias and use of force data, saying that there wanted to be an intentional way to understand what was happening with bias and use of force among our communities of color. The second one was to say, what has happened since the 2016 report, i.e., what progress has been made? Has there been progress made? And then how do we know what that progress looks like? Lastly was to offer sort of actionable recommendations to improve the experiences of BIPOC community, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And for all intents and purposes, that makes sense. That was the nature of the report. A couple of things that we sought out to try to do is just sort of an overhead was to first build bridges, honestly. We expanded the task force. Some of this happened outside of me. It was an invitation to Chief Jolly and other chiefs who were outside of State College, Police Department, and University Police and Public Safety to say that, hey, listen, if we're going to do this, we really need to be thinking about where do our communities of color intersect and interact then with police officers. And even while on the task force, we actually extended that further to say Bellefonte Borough and Spring Township should be a part of this conversation as well, realizing that we have members of the community who live out there. And so they were invited, and both of those chiefs and officer in charge, and now Chief Adam Sawyer are now part of the sort of committee. We got some input from legislative insight. Primarily, the Pennsylvania Black Caucus on Police Reform came and it had a wonderful conversation with us, shared some of their information and work that they're doing for police reform at the Commonwealth-wide level that allowed us to understand sort of some of their efforts to make sure that we were working in tandem rather than at crossroads with each other. And then continual feedback as folks reached out, as folks engaged, as folks shared information or concerns that they had within the overall community. We sat down and invited them into the conversation as well. Working in subgroups, we broke it out into 3 different pieces, not surprisingly, based off of the 3 charges, right? We wanted to look at what was the progress made. And so a group of folks who were critically designed to focus on that. What is the current data analysis, i.e. looking at the bias and use of force data? And then lastly, what was that benchmarking and research piece? We had some faculty who said that, a lot of the things that were offered in the 2016 report sort of made people feel good, but how do we know that's actually going to create measurable change? And so being who I am, and folks I think got to know me, was like, that sounds like a great idea. How about you take the charge and sort of lead that effort on benchmarking and doing the research, so that way then we can ensure what we're offering is actually what others in the community across the country are trying to do. Lastly, the recommendations, which I'll go into a bit more detail here later on, were around 5 key areas, looking at external consultants, diversified workforce, data consistency training, and then opportunities for our police officers to engage in the community. So we start off with, what did we find, right, from the 2016 report? The first thing that was clear and evident was that it was really focused on police and public safety at the university as well as State College Police Department. It did not include Patton, it did not include Ferguson, it did not include Spring, it did not include Bellefonte, it did not include these other areas. And so then our efforts to try to say, what have you done, didn't really make sense, because the reality is the task force and the recommendations from 2016 weren't actually geared towards the other areas of the other municipalities, if you will. And that was a limitation, but something that we recognized and hopefully addressed this time around. They also recognized that there were 5 key areas of things that happened since 2016. The first one being that there was this notion of, what did you do to promote greater recognition and celebration of success? We found out that agencies were engaged in various ways to highlight their efforts, right? Folks were engaged in sharing some of the sort of calls to action, sharing some sort of proclamations, sharing different efforts and opportunities that people could engage and do to realize that the racial equity crisis, not only last year, but over the past, some might say 300 years, has been sort of attended to, and what then has the community been doing in that regard. The increasing recruitment and retention of employees of color in police departments, once again, primarily focused on UPPS and State College Police Department, but UPPS, for obvious reasons, was able to have more success. The recruiting efforts are a bit different. The limitation of the veterans' preference is not specifically tied to them as well, and so they had some of those pieces. State College Police Department and other areas were a bit more constrained, one based on what I just shared, and other areas that also came out that sort of limit the ways in which the police departments are able to then recruit. Providing consistent and ongoing education for students and employees. And the reality is that trainings were offered, and routinely those who were interested are the ones who attended. But it's important to say that those who were interested are the ones who attended, right? Because does that mean that we're reaching out to the communities that we're striving to reach out to? Does it mean that the police departments were engaged with the communities that absolutely needed to hear the message? Not necessarily, but it doesn't mean that that wasn't happening either. It's just the notion of saying that these trainings were offered. The question is, how do we then do that more to get it out to the masses? Targeted outreach to improve and build upon stakeholder engagement. There was a lot of action towards transparency and engagement in community meetings, whether that be with CCU or CDG or RUN or any other acronym within the local areas. The reality is that officers, representatives from different municipalities are engaged in these events, are engaged in these different communities. But if you are not part of that committee or part of that organization, chances are you don't know about it. You don't know about the efforts and the conversations that they're having during F8 conversations to make sure that as we get ready for the first semester for students back with football, what that looks like. And so then it was this notion of saying that we just need to be more transparent about that moving forward. And then establishing a baseline parameters and developing appropriate metrics to assess improvement. And we noticed that there were some efforts made between State College Police Department and UPPS, but in general was not something that a lot of effort had been made holistically. So next piece then is looking at sort of what is the data saying? And I pulled this piece out specifically because there's a lot of other data that goes on there, but I pulled this piece out because it's the one that a lot of people draw their attention to. It's the one that looks at use of force and arrest data. Now, we asked everybody for different levels of data, whether it be a 5-year or 3-year, what they were able to offer to us. And so when we were able to do that, we looked at it and said, okay, is there any disparity happening? So what we found is that based on a 3 to 5 year reflection of the data, there's an overrepresentation of Black and African American community members in arrest and use of force data. And that's just us looking and saying, okay, what is the population of Black identified, African American identified individuals within your municipality? We have that. Now, if we have 3% of the population, but they represent 25% of the arrests, then clearly something is going on. We're not directing and saying that we know what's going on, but we're saying that something is going on, something is happening, we need to address it. And so we called it out. I also will say here briefly that we looked at this for all racial ethnic identity groups for which police departments captured data for. Obviously, if you have 10% Asian American identified individuals within your municipality, and they represent 10% of the arrest records, that seems on par, right? Because it's proportional to the overall population. And so didn't call attention to that except for within the bottom one for UPPS. Looking at Bellefonte, notice that there may be something happening with Black and African American regarding the arrest rate, 4.4% population, 9.1% arrest rate. Ferguson, 4.7 population, 15% arrest rate, and 12% overall use of force. Patton, 5% African American population, 18% arrest rate, 26% overall use of force. And obviously, if you look at the report, you get a bit more detail specifically into what aspects of use of force and what's going on. Spring Township, less than 0.5% of Black and African American population, but greater than 7.5% arrest rate. State College, 4.5% Black African American population and 16% overall use of force. And arrest data was not available at the time. I have since found out that they have that arrest data and are willing to share that as we continue moving forward. And then University Police and Public Safety is a bit more challenging because we were able to hone in specifically looking at University Park and saying that we have a 4.2% student population, a 2.6% employee population who identify primarily as Black African American, but the 11.3% arrest rate and 50% overall use of force arrest rate encompasses all Penn State campuses. Requests were made to have that information further broken out and disaggregated so that way we could hone in specifically at University Park, but that data was not received at the time. Now, for UPPS, we did call out the notion that firearm deployment was the second most use of force tactic against Black African Americans at 19%, but I do want to also include the end here, right? So I don't want to make it seem as if it's 19% of everything that's going on, of hundreds of students. It was an N of 11. But it is also somewhat disconcerting that that is the second most use of force tactic, particularly against Black African American identified individuals, especially within the current racial equity climate that we have. Asian populations experience a greater percentage of use of force at 39% with an N of 7 than did Black African Americans, but that was the only area that Asian Americans experienced a greater percentage of use of force. And so that sets the framework then from what has happened, right, previously since 2016, and what is the data telling us? And so looking at that, those of us on the task force sat down and began breaking out into different pieces, thinking about what those recommendations might be. And truth be told, each group, each one of the different work streams came up with recommendations, and then we sat down and compiled them all into 5 key themes. The first one being the need to think about external consultants. And I'll jump down to the bottom one right quick, because the reality is that we wanted to figure out what more is happening within the racial and ethnic disparity analysis that I just presented on the previous slide. We don't know. There may be things that are either intentional or incidental. I have no idea. It may be the concept that we have a transient population within Center County, right? This football season brings in a lot more folks. Okay, that could be a component of it. We had some feedback come back from our chiefs talking about how different organizations reach out in order to help for requests, particularly related to department stores and things. And so that might be a piece of it, but the reality is that none of us on that task force are experts specifically in understanding the data. And so then the request is to have an external consultant come in, look at the data more intimately and intentionally, and do a racial and ethnic disparity analysis to understand then whether or not that is something that is intentional or incidental, and also be able to provide us with guidance on what that looks like. I'll jump back up to the top, the concept of perceptions of community relations, particularly from domestic minoritized communities as well as non-U.S. citizens. And the reason why I hone in on that is because there have been some recent climate surveys or area surveys or sense of belonging surveys that were done, but the majority of the feedback that came back was often from the majority population. And because of that, then it's suggesting that everything is good. But if you only have 1% of people of color who are responding and 99% of others, then how do you truly know what the experiences is for those minoritized communities as well as those non-U.S. citizens? And so a recommendation to bring in an external consultant that can better help inform how we gather that data to truly understand what's happening as far as community relations, particularly between BIPOC communities and our local policing agencies. There was a comment to better understand the working relationships between our local police agencies. The reality is that many of you inside this room often understand how everybody works together, right? You understand the FA, you understand CDG, you understand what happens during large events within the area. But the challenge is that for the lay person in our community, they may not understand that nuance. They may not understand why all of a sudden there's an increased police presence. And so there's a request to have an external consultant come in to identify how we might further identify and further be more transparent about the working relationships between local police agencies with particular focus on large events, with identifying ways that we can be more transparent into these relationships, because the reality is if you're in the know, you know. If you don't, then you have no idea who to ask. Case processing, there was a request to say, how do we get more transparent insight into case processing, focusing then on the racial, ethnic, or gender and demographic differences. Once again, it's not my experience, it's not my area of expertise. And so then wanting to bring somebody in that is going to allow us to understand, are the disposition of cases for Black African American, for Asian American, for BIPOC communities different than those for majority white communities? Is it different for men compared to women? And how do we look at that, and how do we understand that in the context of what we are trying to accomplish then as a broad community, looking at this overall? The next recommendation is one that seems very familiar, the concept of diversified workforce, right? But we took a little bit of a different approach in saying that we want to think differently. We're encouraging our chiefs and others to think differently about how we hire them. Some of this is borrowed directly from academia, if you will, the concept of a cluster hire, right? Development of a more unified approach to increasing structural diversity. We're talking about the hardcore numbers. And the reality is that as we offer in the report, No, simply having more Black identified or more people of color identified officers on your workforce is not going to automatically improve the experiences of BIPOC communities. That's not going to happen. But there is something to be said by feeling represented by those who are charged with serving. Now, we also call attention within the report, if you've had a chance to read it, that says that we recognize that veterans' preference is a challenge. And there are some things we need to look at, that we need to engage in more targeted recruitment practices. But the recommendation nonetheless is saying that how do we line up the CBAs, the hiring schedules, the efforts, the money, the initiatives to ensure then that as you are sitting here, or standing here, introducing folks as new hires in Penn, what somebody could be doing the same thing over in State College and somebody could be doing the same thing over in Ferguson, because now you have a community of individuals who are seen as folks who are helping to police this overall area, and they are more committed to wanting to stay here, recognizing that we have a really good retention rate amongst our officers in general, but looking to identify different ways to bring in more diversity within the overall area. The second thing is a DE&I director/equity officer, recommending an approach similar to what happens right now within SCASD with Dr. Sria Chapters, and saying that why not identify somebody who can help lead the charge and lead the efforts for all of the local policing agencies outside of University Police and Public Safety, because there already is a person doing that on campus for us, in the name of Iris Richardson, who was on the task force and also has been doing a phenomenal job looking at policing in the communities in general across the university, across the entire Penn State University. But this person then can be a shared position that is seen as external support from minoritized communities as well as internal support than police officers. Somebody who officers can turn to when they have questions and aren't sure about whether or not something was done the best way or how to do something the better way the next time, or what should be the way that something should be done next time, as well as then having a point person that the local community, particularly the minoritized community, can reach out to when they have questions. And while many of us often say that our officers and our agencies and our chiefs are open and ready and willing to engage in conversations, it does not change the fact that having somebody that folks within a local community can point to and say, this is the person that is specifically charged with leading DE&I efforts, is the person I want to reach out to. And so then that recommendation. Also then looking at the mentorship program, there was a consideration of saying that we should look to develop something based off of the model that the Pennsylvania State program currently has. Because what they have found is that not only does it help to develop a sense of community for individuals, but also provides then a hiring sort of incentive that says, coming to our area, not only were you going to help support you through a cluster, support you throughout these all understandings, but also then provide you with the experience and knowledge you need in order to help you grow within this space. Recommendation around data consistency. And I've heard recently that there have been efforts underway to do this, but consistent collection across all local policing agencies that says, how do we understand what's going on? The reality is right now, based on what the information I saw, a lot of folks collect use of force data very differently. A lot of folks are collecting racial identity data differently. A lot of folks are collecting gender identity data very differently. And so if we're going to be looking to provide sort of a transparent view of what's happening, then we need to ensure that all of our local policing agencies are collecting information in a similar fashion that says that here is how we are doing as a community. We can look at our use of force and say that restraint, hold, handcuffing is consistent across because we are defining it the same way. And so recommendation then is that folks look to develop and define a data collection standard, as well as begin collection of data on traffic stops. Now, already acknowledge the fact that that is something that's going into effect, something that is already in the works, and so that's going to be data that will begin being collected moving forward, but at the same time wanting to ensure it's going to be consistent throughout any area, because as many of you know, you can drive between 3 different municipalities within a 10, 15-minute travel in the local area. Next would be data management then. The concept of transparent management of data and communication of data, right? Coming back to that same piece, how then do we allow individuals to understand what the data means? Because now it's transparently managed, which for us, and me being a part of the university, is saying that why not leverage the university resources and have OPR capture and report consistent data in a way, in the fashion that somebody can click to a website and say, here's what this looks like. If I'm thinking about moving to this area, am I concerned because this? Or I'm thinking about moving to this area and you know what, I feel comfortable because at least I can acknowledge and recognize that this community is willing to call attention to what is happening, and I can see a downward trend because they are actively committed with everything else that has now been built upon sort of the conversation that we've been having today. The next piece then looking at a recommendation for training and saying, looking at specialized training, in particular developing a specialized sector for matters related to mental health and substance abuse, calling involving juveniles, noise complaints, pricing negotiators, and domestic violence and assault. And I recognize that many agencies currently have this, but if we're looking at this now as a collective, it's a notion to say that shouldn't every single agency within the area have this? And so then how do we leverage the resources and the information for those who currently have this going on, so that way we can provide those other agencies who don't currently have this with the information for how would they begin to move this forward in a positive and intentional way. Crisis intervention team, the refinement and reevaluation of the CIT to ensure it's meeting its purpose. This was something that we found out very late on in the process, that there exists a crisis intervention team. The challenge, however, is that the majority of the community doesn't know. Majority of the community doesn't know that they can reach out and that this is a resource for them. And if that's the case, then we need to refine and reevaluate what that looks like to ensure that it's going to be seen as a resource, an added resource for the overall community, thus it being a recommendation. The last piece then being continuous training, which is saying that we encourage continued de-escalation and in-service training, whether that be in person with new technology, utilizing local experts with particular emphasis on the fact that you have a whole bunch of people who do nothing but study this type of work at the university. And so then why not partner with our colleagues here, who then also have colleagues across the country that we might be able to bring in, so that way we're helping to build up sort of our own community, if you will, while not having to spend too many resources. The last thing is really focus on community, and this is sort of an interesting sort of recommendation, if you will, which is thinking about community engagement. And for us, it was saying that, listen, the biggest thing that a lot of folks often call attention to is the fact that they only ever see officers when somebody is in trouble. They only ever see officers when somebody is being sort of responded to in a problematic way. And so why not provide officers the opportunity to engage in service hours with local nonprofits? For us, we see it as a win-win. Not only does it allow folks to understand that our officers are giving back to the community in meaningful and contributing ways, but also it allows officers to choose nonprofits that they can develop more personal and connected relationships with, and also compensated for their time. We're not saying that you should be doing this as an add-on, right? That you just now need to find ways to do this during your off hours, but also saying that, listen, what does this look like for you? Do we obviously hope that some folks would choose some local agencies that are more committed with a focus on looking at the experiences of BIPOC communities? Of course, but not trying to force anybody's hand in that regard. But still looking to try to find ways to further develop and bridge and hone in on the experiences of our local policing agencies as well as communities of color. For us, looking at next steps, the first one is sharing the report with the local community to generate discussion and feedback, i.e. this conversation right now, to make sure that people know that the report's out there, that if folks want me or others to come and do a presentation, I'm more than happy to do so. Just responding to somebody earlier today saying, I'll see you September 10th at your staff meeting, because we don't want this to be a report that merely sits on the shelf and that we then come back to another 5 years trying to check in on it. Respond to community calls for transparency by presenting at local community councils and other key stakeholder groups. And so whatever that looks like for you within the municipality, please let me know. Continue and expand the task force to work and support local policing agencies on realizing the success of the recommendations. We have some plans in the work to transition the task force to an advisory committee on policing and communities of color, waiting for approval from the executive sponsors, Tom Fontaine and Sarah Thorndike, and what that might look like for how we begin the next steps. I hope that I'll be able to stay connected to it, and others will be as well. I know that all the chiefs will be invited. I believe Terry has expressed interest as well, and so we'll be looking forward to continuing that. And then lastly, continue the dialogue with local, statewide, and national groups, particularly the Pennsylvania legislative representatives, right? Because we don't want to fall out of step from what they're thinking about. Some things are outside of our scope, and so we'll let them run when they need to. But at the same time, wanting to make sure that we are moving forward in a way that has a vision and purpose for what everybody's looking at, particularly looking at cross-collaborative efforts focused on police reform. Took me a long time to get this, everybody's name on this slide, but I wanted to make sure that you understood just how big the task force membership was. I know we didn't have nearly everyone and anyone who wanted to be involved, but we did expand it and try to include as many voices and diverse voices as we possibly could. And so I already called attention to both Terry and Tyler here. And so please, if I missed anything, by all means, feel free to add any additional context to the conversation. And our hope is that as we look to move forward with the advisory committee, that we have a sort of smaller subset of this group that allows us to do some really good work as well. And that is sort of my presentation, and happy to take any questions, comments, concerns, or thoughts.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cunningham. Now, if you would stop sharing your, oh, you already did that. All right, now let's get the gallery view. So I can see everybody. Where's that? I don't see that on my screen.
Over in the upper left.
I'm looking at the options on top, but I don't see a gallery view. Oh, all right, thank you, Doug. Okay, thank you. So, questions, comments, board members, public? Raise your hand.
Betsy?
Betsy has her hand raised.
Pardon? Who?
Betsy has her hand.
Just to let you know, I've been invited to a meeting next week by Tom Fontaine and Sarah Thorndike from the university to talk about next steps. So I think that's the, as Dr. Cunningham had mentioned, the transitioning the task force into an implementation or advisory panel. I think that's where those conversations will start.
Okay, who is it, Betsy Whitman?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. So, first of all, Dr. Cunningham, wow, thank you. I was first very impressed by the thoroughness and the breadth of the report, and then I was impressed by your last slide because I knew many of the people. A lot of them members are connected to the community diversity group, which I'm active in, and we're very fortunate to have it. So I have so my big question is where we go from here and how we keep this research on a front burner, and it sounds like, Doug, you're taking that step. So if there's some way for upcoming meetings or input sessions that you could even have an audience of hangers-on who are just observing but not necessarily part of the input team, that would be a welcome option by me and perhaps others. I have some small picture questions that I'm just curious about. One was, in particular, the traffic stop data, and I noticed on the chart in the report that was the one area, the one data where there was no, where the data was just not available. And I recall from reading studies way back in the 90s of, I think perhaps one of the first signs or the first public awareness or conversations that were being had of disparities between in how people of color were treated differently from whites was in traffic stops. So I'm just curious about why that data is not available here, and I'm sure Chief Jolly will explain that, but do you have any information on that, or is that just a small picture? Is it an important piece of data? So that's the first question, and then the other two are sort of related. I've also become recently, aware of the Police Executive Research Forum. Some of the materials that Dr. Jones has shared with us are from that group. And then I've just recently learned about restorative practice, and I'm thinking of that in part because as I'm watching in the borough, I don't think it's necessarily as true in Patton Township, but there appears to be some tension between the governing officials and the police. So perhaps a restorative practice in reducing that, the tension. I know that, of course, restorative justice is used in daily police work and processing work. So those three questions, and I'm sorry if they're a small picture, but I'm just interested in some of the details. Thank you.
Chief Jolly, I'm going to go ahead and respond to the first one.
So I can take a swing at the traffic stop one. So traffic stop data, so in Pennsylvania, if we're going to issue a summary citation, it's a non-traffic citation. Those actually do collect and have collected both racial and ethnicity data on those citations. Traffic citations, so if we're issuing somebody a ticket, they did not have an area for us to collect that data. Now, that changed about 6 months ago. So on citations now in the state of Pennsylvania, there is a block for the operator's race and also their ethnicity. So that has changed. That is different now. The problem is that the police do not ticket every single person we stop, right? So we have to figure out a way to collect, if we stop somebody and give them a warning, how do we also track that? So we are working on and have deployed in Patton Township a new form that our officers fill out at the end of their shifts. And so we're starting to track that information, collecting everything from traffic stops, sites, person stops. So we're looking for their race, their ethnicity, male, female, things like that. So we're in the process of making sure that we're getting that data to be able to make available.
Oh, thank you.
How
I
about
would say,
the other two questions that Betsy asked?
yep, I would say briefly regarding sort of restorative practices is outside of my field of expertise, and so I won't be able to respond necessarily to that piece. Remind me again, the third question was on?
Well, just another resource that I've recently been introduced to that seems fairly positive in what we're trying to achieve here, and that's the Police Executive Research Forum.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it's one of those, thank you. I'm adding it to my list of things that we should look into as we consider the next steps.
Great. Good luck. Keep on.
Thank you.
Okay, Anita Tees, yes?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Cunningham. This was very informative. My comment relates to helping the broader community become aware of the efforts. And it's perhaps a question for Larry and the website management. I find it very valuable to hear you, Dr. Cunningham, explain it in addition to whatever the written material is. And I'm wondering, Larry, on the website, when one announces, look here for information on this topic, if there could be a link to the CNET recording, say, see CNET recording of August 18 at the whatever it is, starting at 5:15. CNET is so good at identifying its recordings by subject matter so that you can go directly to the item on the agenda. And I'm wondering if that is a way, as we include this information for the wider public on our website, where they can actually hear the presentation that goes with the printed material. Thank you.
Okay.
We certainly can add it to the website. That's not a problem.
Okay, yeah, and Sophie, I assume is still on, so both of them have received your suggestion. Elliot, go ahead.
I really want to compliment Anita on her comments, because I think that gets at the heart of solving some of these problems. It's great to have reports, and it's great to have people who want to do things better, but actually getting the information out where people can see what's happening and so they can react to it and actually put these things into practice is something we do through communications. I think Anita's idea is very good. I don't know if we've fully explored all the ways that we can do this, but we can sit around and meet all we want, but it's a hearts and minds thing with our community. And how do we open our hearts and use our minds in this endeavor?
Okay, thanks, Elliot. Any other comments, raised hands?
Pam would like to speak.
Sorry.
Who?
Pam Robb, Miss
Oh,
Robb.
Pam Robb. Pam, go ahead.
At first, let me thank Dr. Cunningham for this presentation. We just got the report, in all fairness, to review the board, to have more questions, and to just dive in a little more. I think we just need a little more time to review it. And to some of the issues that you presented on your presentation, I can honestly say we are extremely fortunate to have Chief Jolly on board. He stepped out of his, police zone to put on the books, addressing issues of people of color, documenting, setting up forms to, get us their data. He went out of his way just to do that for us, this board, and for our community. So I would like to at least acknowledge that we have an outstanding chief who is honest, transparent, and looking forward to our future. And as Mr. Watson can attest, our chief is at numerous organizations, numerous community organizations that affects all of us. So as we move forward and look forward to working with other municipalities on this issue, I just want to applaud those who step out and have the courage to speak out. So, Dr. Cunningham, thank you for this presentation. As Patton setting an example, I'm the first person of color on the board and can attest that some of my experiences have been heard. And I sit on both sides, the police side and the community side. So as we move forward on your presentation to open this issue up, to educate our community, to work together for the betterment of all communities, not just Patton, but for all our communities. I thank you again for this presentation, and I look forward to Doug attending the meeting and bringing us back information so we can move forward and we can decide honestly how we're going to address this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. You have a comment? Chief Jolly, go ahead.
If I may, yeah. I just wanted to real quickly say that next to last slide that Dr. Cunningham put up showed obviously a lot of folks that were invested a lot of time, and he gave a little bit of kudos, but really A big thank you. It was gigantic asking for him to keep us on task, to keep us moving forward, and to guide us. So he did absolutely a fantastic job, just like he did tonight, and telling us about, giving us this report tonight. So thank you to Dr. Cunningham. I just want to say that publicly. So thank you.
Thanks.
Great. Any other questions or comments?
Betsy has her hand raised.
Betsy?
I have one last.
Go ahead, Betsy.
Yes, thank you. Yes, and Pam, thank you for your comments. Wonderful. And Anita, wonderful as always. Where we go from here in terms of supporting a consultant to come in I assume that's something you'll be discussing at the meeting, Doug, as to whether we approach this in a regional matter, and then each municipality would contribute funds towards supporting that consultant, or inside look at where we're going and making suggestions and where we should be going.
I'll report back after the meeting.
Okay.
I've not been involved in the process up to now, so I think the first step will be, how does Patton Township, what kind of representation do we want on this next committee from Patton Township?
Right.
How are we going to ask for volunteers? And who might we put on that implementation committee? And then I think the implementation committee will discuss all those aspects of how do we, what's the best way to implement these things. Obviously, several of them will be, will probably be best handled regionally, especially issues like training and data management. Other issues may be handled slightly different by each municipality. So stay tuned. All that information should be coming down the pike, I suspect, over the next 12 to 18 months.
I want to acknowledge that the Patton Township has benefited tremendously from the resources and effort that this university-funded task force has put into it. So for that, we are very grateful. Look forward to working together as a region going forward. Thank you.
Okay, I have a suggestion that we have a follow-up, a follow-up on this at the second September meeting, which is what, September 22nd? Whatever, the second board meeting in September, because we have a couple of supervisors going on vacation right after this meeting. So this will give us all a chance to review this report more thoroughly, and then come back ready to discuss further actions. And of course, we'll ask Chief Jolly if he has any additional things to add at that meeting. Is that okay with the board? Okay, I'm getting thumbs up. Thank you. We'll move on then. Thank you, Dr. Cunningham, very much. Let's move on to the next agenda item, which is policy discussion on standards for use of deadly force, the blended policy proposal. Chief, is this your?
I'm going to start here.
Oh, Doug's going to start.
If you'll permit me. We've been talking about this probably in depth since April. Chief Jolly and Dr. Ben Jones had put together information, provided it to the board. We had some discussions in May, looking at both the model policy and policy that Chief Jolly had put forth. At the conclusion of our discussion on May 26th, there is still some distance between the two policies, so the board did task the manager, or me, and the solicitor, Betsy Dupuy, to see if we could put something together to bring, and I called it a blended policy because we brought in elements from both documents that Chief Jolly had put together, a document that Dr. Jones had put together, and also I did go back and review many of the source materials that Dr. Jones had used too, and I brought in some of those elements. So Over the last 5 or 6 weeks, I've been working closely with the solicitor. We put together an initial, can you put up the, Alex, could you put up item 3B? Yeah, there you go, thank you. So Betsy Dupuy and I had worked together and put together an initial policy of what we thought should be in there. Then we brought in Chief Jolly and Dr. Jones, and we had a couple of sessions. And we went through in fairly, and quite a bit of detail over each of these statements that were included in the original draft. And I will say there were a lot of, we went through several changes. Not everything was changed, but I think everything, there was a little bit of change to almost everything. And at the end of the day, we came to what we think is the best policy for Patton Township that not only the solicitor and I agree on, but Dr. Jones and Chief Jolly also agree on. If you let me, I'll just run through it briefly. If you can go back up to A, Alex, thank you. You know, we started with a sanctity of life statement just to give a broad overview of you know, what is our philosophy in Patton Township. The police department places the highest value on preserving the sanctity of life and protecting the dignity and liberty of all persons. The apprehension of criminal offenders and protection of property must always be subservient to the protection of life. So that sets the standard that, you know, the rest of it flows from there, really. Remember, we had a lot of discussion on legal justification and the details that are included in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania law. So we need to keep that in the policy because it is the law, at least partly the law that provides the standards for what the police department does. But we also recognize that that Commonwealth law has been modified over time by a series of decisions issued by the United States Supreme Court. Primary one that you see discussed mostly is Tennessee v. Garner. And then the other two really important issues that have to do with legal justification, you hear these things when you hear or read about potential cases against police officers, or in the case of the George Floyd case, there was a lot of discussion on training. What was the department's training? So obviously the training that's mandated by the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And then there's additional training that the Patton Township and the police department require. So all that training is part of that legal justification. And then last but not least is that officer's proper application of what they've been taught and how they've been trained. I'm not going to go through every word of this, but I tell you, item C, we had a lot of discussion about to make sure that we were thorough, but not redundant. And you'll see that the term de-escalation shows up probably more often in this policy than I think most any other term. So twice under C, we notice, we note that we use de-escalation as one of the primary means of dealing with situations. Both in the first and second sentences, we mentioned de-escalating, and that there's officers shall endeavor to exhaust all other reasonable means prior to using deadly force. We note then in the second paragraph there that each situation is different. We're relying on the officers to use their training to evaluate what they're seeing and hearing and respond appropriately. Then we get down into some more of the details of deadly force. Obviously, you know, termination and use of deadly force is obviously was sadly reflected in the George Floyd case, obviously. So we want to make sure that officers always understand that as soon as the subject is no longer a threat, then deadly force is no longer justified. We went through some additional items for called them clarifications, verbal warning, shoot to stop. I think we've talked about that in the past. probably, I think, one of the areas where we had a lot of discussion, especially with Dr. Jones, is that aspect about how police deal with fleeing suspects. So I think the majority of this language that we've included in here comes from the Philadelphia Police Department's policy, where they talk about the totality of circumstances that has to be considered by an officer before he could use deadly force against a fleeing suspect. That's different than it's how it's stated in the Commonwealth law, but those standards included here under fleeing suspect reflect those items that were the three factors that the Supreme Court identified in Tennessee v. Gardner that had to do with use of deadly force against fleeing suspects. Then to wrap up, we have item C, prohibition on use of deadly force, noting that people sometimes with mental health issues, other issues, may only be hazard or danger to themselves and not pose imminent threat of death or seriously bodily injury to others. So we will not be using deadly force against those, but we then included a caution that a person who is initially perceived as a threat only to themselves can quickly become a threat to others. And finally, to end up the proposed blended policy, two items that we want to make sure that officers are aware of and everyone knows that this is part of our standard operating procedure is that once the scene is safe and clear and as soon as practical, we will provide appropriate medical care to individuals regardless of the nature of their emergency, whether it's first aid or we need to get an ambulance there to transport them to more intense medical assistance. And finally, we have this is already within our departmental policies, but the duty to intervene. And this is even, officer has duty to intervene to prevent or stop the use of excessive force by another officer when it's safe and reasonable to do so. That's always been part of the department's mandates or policies. It's even a question that's generally asked when we do oral interviews of officers. There's a situational question that says if you come up on a scene and find somebody, a uniformed officer, doing something inappropriate, what do you do? So that duty is clearly in the policy, not only in our use of deadly force, but in other aspects. And with that, I'd ask the board to consider endorsing that at this point. We're not asking you to adopt it at this point. Obviously, if you have questions and comments, we'll take those and discuss the matter. If the board is happy with what we put together, next step in this process would be to go to the Patton Township Police Officers Association. That's the bargaining unit that represents our officers. We sit down with them, go through this policy as we've done with you, ask them for their input and comments and questions, and have a dialogue with them. If from that process we found changes that were needed, we'd come back to the board, I'd suggest on September 22nd, and talk about that. And then I think we should be close to adopting a final policy sometime in October. And with that, I'll ask Chief Jolly and Dr. Jones and Betsy Dupuy if they have any additional comments they'd like to provide. Chief?
Not really any additional comments. We've been discussing this for about a year, so I think that there was obviously a lot of work, a lot of research that went into it from everybody involved. But I want to thank Doug and Betsy Dupuy. I think they did a fantastic job kind of blending everything together and getting us onto the same field of play. So, and working with Dr. Jones, appreciate all of his input and all the research he did on this topic as well. So.
Okay, thanks, Chief. Dr. Jones, do you have any additional things you wanted to add?
Not too much. Mr. Erickson did a great job explaining it, and just wanted to thank him, Ms. Dupuy and Chief Jolly for all their work together and the collaborative spirit of everyone involved in sort of nailing this down. So it was just want to thank everyone and glad to see this move forward. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Jones. Solicitor Dupuy, is there anything you wish to add?
Nothing further. I think everybody said it. I am very impressed as to how we all work together and really, Dr. Jones and Chief Jolly really helped Doug and I. I know the legal pieces. Doug knew the sort of practical side of things, and I think the two of them brought a lot to bear on this. So I think what you have in front of you is a very well thought out and comprehensive piece. That doesn't mean somebody couldn't Monday morning quarterback it, but I think what we've put forward to you is really in a good shape to move forward.
Thanks. Comments, questions from the board? Any comments or questions from the public? Okay, seeing none. I would suggest that unless the board members object, that you can assume that consensus of the board is that we endorse this proposal. Oh, Betsy, you have something to say? Go ahead.
Yes, apologies, I just found a question. I ask it because we've asked it before, I can never quite remember, and it seems to me it's a question that I might get from constituents, and that has to do with the stop to shoot section where officers are directed to fire their weapons to stop and incapacitate an assailant, and yet to do that, they are then advised to shoot at the center body mass. So to me, it seems almost contradictory that that you would try to incapacitate by shooting at the center body mass. Obviously, that's a better target, but it's also potentially more lethal to the target.
Chief, go ahead.
So that section actually pretty much comes directly out of our previous policy.
I recognize it, yes.
Yeah, so the word incapacitate, I guess we could say that, officers are supposed to fire their weapons to make sure that the threat stops. It's not like on the movies where if you shoot somebody, they go flying 30 feet backwards after being hit by one bullet. So essentially what we're going for there is to make sure that if there is a deadly force threat, they engage it until that threat stops, or that person is incapacitated and no longer a threat and danger to the officers or to the general public. And to accomplish that, we do train to shoot at center body mass or the largest body mass exposed. And a lot of that is to make sure that we hit our target as well.
Right.
We are not the military, so in law enforcement, we are responsible for every single round that comes out of the end of our gun. So we need to make sure that we are firing at the biggest or largest body mass exposed or center mass, so that we know that we are hitting what we intend to hit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, again, unlike movies, hitting legs or arms is
Very,
really, really, really hard.
very difficult.
It happens
yes.
far more often in movies than it does in real life.
Right.
So,
Yes.
to aim at an arm is something this big, to aim at the body mass is aiming at a target that big.
It makes,
It sounds a little gruesome, but in the end of the day, it's really the best policy for when an officer finally gets to the point where he has to deploy deadly force. Remember, we've exhausted all other means by the time we've gotten here.
makes sense. Thank you for that explanation again.
Okay, any other comments or questions? So, no, the board did not object to my view that we have consensus on endorsing the policy, and I congratulate you on all your hard work and putting this together. And I know it's taken many hours to get to this place. So we will then take this up again on September 22nd,
Yes, sir.
after you've had a chance to review this with the Patton Township Police Officers Association. So, moving on. Next item on the agenda is the Act 537 Facilities Update, Plan Update. Doug?
Yeah, this is a regional initiative. UAJ is our public sewer provider. For them to do updates to their plant, the Department of Environmental Protection, Pennsylvania DEP, requires that they go through this process of updating what we in government call the 537 plan. We did one a couple of months ago for another upgrade to their treatment facility. This one has to do with biosolids upgrade. The study has been completed. We provided a link in the agenda for anyone who wanted to read the study. The Board of Supervisors is required to hold a public hearing, take public comment, and then following that, it's recommended that the board consider action to adopt Resolution 2021-020.
Okay, I will now open the public hearing on adoption of this resolution. Is there anyone who wishes to speak to this? This is your opportunity. Elliot, go ahead.
I move that the hearing be closed.
Let me wait 5 seconds here. This is your last chance if you want to make a comment on this resolution, adoption of this resolution. Going once, going twice. I now close the public hearing. And now the board, I will accept a motion to adopt the resolution 2021-020.
Elliot?
So moved.
Elliot, move. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, Pam Rob. Discussion. Any discussion? Seeing none, let's move to a vote. All those in favor, please say aye and raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Okay, any nay votes? None, so the motion passes. Thank you very much. Next is item, this is maybe a long session, so I'm going to take the chair's prerogative and call a recess for 5 minutes. Okay, everyone's on the board is back, so I'm calling the session back to order. So the next item on the agenda is 3D, proposed letter to Penn State University regarding student vaccination. You want to start this, Doug, or want to move to just have Anita present this?
This is Anita's initiative, so
Okay.
why don't we let her introduce it?
Okay, Anita Tees, Supervisor Tees, would please, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much. Before I get to the specifics of the letter, because there are a couple phrases I would like to suggest adding, and Supervisor Abrams has made an excellent suggestion also on a change in the letter. But before we begin with that, I'd like to give a little background about why I believe it's important and appropriate for our board to send this letter to Penn State, asking them to reconsider their decision not to recommend vaccines. On August 12th, Penn State issued a press release on its Penn State website that had a number of statistics regarding the self-survey that they had sent out to Penn State students. And this morning, Sharima Young, who is the Government Affairs Office coordinator, who does a wonderful job keeping in contact with all of our elected officials, sent our board a letter also quoting from some of those statistics and raising some issues. And I'm grateful to Sharima. Last week, I had asked her for some additional statistics because, as I noted, the percentages that were being quoted regarding the survey responses from Penn State students, I wondered how many actual students we were talking about at the University Park campus. How many undergraduate students are there at University Park? How many graduate students are there at University Park? And she promptly sent me those numbers. She's very responsive, and I'm grateful for that. But I prepared a couple charts that, to me, help elaborate a bit on the statistics that Penn State has been quoting. And Alex, I think if you could put up the Penn State statistics for fall 2021. Now these are from Penn State's own statistics from the August 12th press release. As you know, they sent out a survey and students self-reported back to them. And so using Sharima's, the figures she provided me on the Penn State actual enrollments, there are 45,901 students at University Park. The survey response that Penn State has quoted, 71% of those University Park students responded, so that's 32,589. Of those 32,000, also 29% did not respond. So that means 13,311 students did not respond to the survey. Of the 32,589 at University Park, 88% reported fully or partially vaccinated status, which is 28,678. I think there could be a misinterpretation, not on Penn State's part, but just because people skip over the part that says 88% of responding students. It's not 88% of the students who are actually on campus. It's the 88% that responded to the survey, and only 71% of the people responded to the survey. So 12% did not report being vaccinated of those 32,589. So what that said to me was you have 13,311 who didn't respond to the survey at all, and you have another 3,900 who did respond to the survey but did not say that they had been vaccinated. So that would be 17,221 students of unknown vaccination status. Now maybe, and let us hope, many of them are vaccinated and they just haven't reported it. But the presumption could be that you're looking at more than 17,000 students who are unvaccinated. And why I think some of our residents are so concerned about that. If you could put up the next slide on the Pennsylvania Department of Health statistics. There is a woman, Dr. Joyce Ferfaro, who teaches at Penn State. For the last year, she has tracked all of the Pennsylvania Department of Health statistics, the ones on their COVID-19 dashboard. And she has put together a spreadsheet of what they report by the day and summarized by the week for zip codes throughout the region. I've lifted copies just for our State College area region, but she has this going all the way back to last summer. And so when the Penn State students returned in the fall of 2020, as you can see for the week of September 12th, the increase in reported cases, and again, September 19 and September 26 of last year. And it went on through the whole fall, such that by December 2020, Penn State itself reported that there were 5,006 cases of student infection. And that's by the New York Times reporting as well. But Joyce's statistics, they continue to this day. I'd be happy to put a link to her full spreadsheet that goes for many pages. But looking at August 15 here and August 16, August 17, and what the cumulative totals are. Alex, if we could put up the New York Times. So this is from the New York Times of December 2020 on their reported data. And there were 5,006 Penn State student infections that they tracked. And they tracked universities all around the country. And but that was their total. And of course, Penn State has many students. I mean, certainly you would expect them to have more infections than smaller colleges, but 5,006 Penn State students just last fall. So thank you, Alex. So those are the experiences that I think many of our citizens in this township associate with students coming back, because when they came back last fall, the infection numbers soared. And I know there can be a lot of discussion about the decisioning here, but I'm proposing that we send them a letter, and there are 3 suggested phrases I would add. In her letter to us this morning, Sharima Young said, and I will quote from the end of the letter, very well written letter. She had the statistics, which I've just looked at here, but that, and the hope and the encouragement she voiced that many more students are vaccinated than are reporting, and that those numbers will go up. And I'm sure we all hope for that. Oh, it would be wonderful. I mean, I think Penn State would love to see all the students vaccinated, just as we would. But she said that in part of this letter, where it's to suggest that students will negatively impact the health and well-being of the residents of the center region and the economic well-being of the community, perpetuates an anti-student perspective that simply does not reflect the data or the many benefits that students bring to our community. I would like to add into this letter the recognition after the first paragraph that where we recognize the challenges Penn State faced, to add, and we acknowledge the many positive benefits that Penn State and its students bring to our community. I don't think anyone denies that. But also a phrase in the second paragraph where we say that we are concerned that unvaccinated college students, like any other groups of unvaccinated residents, may spur an increase in virus infections. I think any groups of unvaccinated residents do pose a challenge for hospitalizations and the spreading, especially now with the contagious Delta, to children under 12 who cannot get the vaccine. And also in the final paragraph, to clarify, and I'll read through the whole thing as recommended, and I'm grateful to Elliot for this wording, that we strongly urge Penn State to consider its decision not to require incoming students to be vaccinated and to require vaccinations, just as many other Big Ten universities are doing. If it would be simpler, I could read the whole revised version as proposed, that it would then be, we recognize there are many challenging factors that Penn State weighed in deciding whether to require incoming and returning students to be vaccinated. And we acknowledge the many positive benefits that Penn State and its students bring to our community. We are hearing from many of our citizens who are concerned that unvaccinated college students, like any other groups of unvaccinated residents, may spur an increase in virus infections and hospitalizations in our communities. Among other consequences, this would impact our schools, where children under age 12 do not have the protection of a vaccine. It also would impact the economic health of our businesses should a virus surge prompt new restrictions. Therefore, for the public health and economic well-being of our communities, we, the Patton Township Board of Supervisors, strongly urge Penn State to reconsider its decision not to require incoming students to be vaccinated and to require vaccinations, just as many other Big Ten universities are doing. Thank you for your consideration. That is the letter that I put before the board for its consideration. Thank you.
Anita, would you like to move that the board send this letter to, as you have read it, to President Barron of Penn State?
Yes, I would so move.
Is there a second? Elliot Abrams seconded. Okay, discussion, board members? Yes, Elliot, go ahead, and then Pam afterwards.
I watched the whole show last night, and a lot of good information was shared.
Why don't you identify what show you watched?
It was the webinar by Penn State to the elected officials about what they're doing and why. And to me, it was concerning when the president talked about that he's noticed with other universities where vaccination was required that maybe their percentages weren't any different than ours. But I think a different argument needs to be made, and that is that, is there any option for students not to pay tuition? You have to pay tuition. Well, we're not going to charge tuition because people don't like it. This is something that we actually need to have done. Is there any debate about whether we are required to have seat belts? This is not a liberty issue, and so we're deadly serious. And I also, at the end, I asked a question. They're talking about the football games, and I've always thought that one of the biggest dangers for people is actually in the crowding that occurs right at the gates before the game begins, and also in the corridors underneath Beaver Stadium where people are really packed together. And he started laughing about it. I couldn't tell if he just thought that was silly, but it's serious. And to me, the people sitting in the stadium during the game, I mean, you'd make that choice. People are sort of packed in, but there is pretty good airflow in the area. That's why they prohibit smoking. And the situation at the entrances is something that should be considered. I don't have the answer to it, but maybe they can. So It's just sort of a cavalier attitude about it.
Okay. Pam Roth, go ahead.
I too was on the webinar and had questions, and as other officials had questions. Before we take a vote, could we hear from our public? I would like to hear from our community this issue before we make a decision. We need to hear from our community.
Sure. Yeah, I'll be asking for public comments. Is there anything else you wish to add, Pam, before we move to someone else?
Yeah, I'm on the fence. I read Anita's letter. I read the revised. I agree with the 2 paragraphs or the 3 paragraphs. I think that should start your letter, because it's praising Penn State for the initial effort. But the bottom part to your paragraph says how serious this issue is. So in case of getting lost with numbers and figures, to be direct, you know, I really like and really support your 3 paragraphs, your 3 last paragraphs. But I think we still need to hear from our public before making such an important decision. This letter represents not just this board, but the community.
Right. Other,
Betsy Whitman.
Betsy Whitman? Betsy Whitman, go ahead.
Sure. Just a question about the public. Are there any members of the public currently waiting to make comments? And if not, Pam, were you referring that or suggesting that we should wait until our September board meeting? Okay, you're wanting them. Yeah, so I am in support of this letter. I can get into details, but I think depending on how the vote goes, I'll give those opinions or not. But I also wanted to point out that before we send it off, it might be a good idea to find out exactly how many of the Big Ten colleges are requiring vaccines. I believe it's 7 out of 10. That's a full 70%, but we should get that data. I just looked up in the Chronicle of Higher Education that overall, and this was 2 days ago, overall 741 schools, colleges, universities across the country are requiring vaccinations. And given that there are about 4,000 universities and colleges across the nation, that's about 18% of them requiring it. So I would suggest adding that in, and I would suggest adding in the first paragraph the word COVID-19. So it's quite obvious that what vaccination we're talking about, but it never hurts to be overly obvious.
Okay. Other people wish to make comments, public or otherwise? I see, it's Anita. Yes, go ahead, Anita.
I believe the board did receive a public comment that Doug Erickson sent out to the board at 3:30 this afternoon from a resident asking that the letter be read as part of our discussion.
Oh, I think the request is the letter be entered into the minutes.
Okay, I see.
We don't include letters. We will mention that Joan Bouchard did send us an email regarding this issue.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And we definitely include all attachments in the record of a meeting, so his letter will be included.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody have comments or questions? Yes, Ms. Burnett, go ahead. You have the floor.
I just wanted to comment, first of all, thank you for putting this letter together. I have heard people talking about if we treated polio this way, we would have never gotten past polio. And the fact that we're having this as a matter of choice, when this pandemic is not going to end until enough people in the world are vaccinated, it seems like we're choicing ourselves literally to death in this country and around the world. So thank you for your effort on this. I wish there were more people here speaking about it. Thank you.
Any other comments? I'll make a couple then, if we don't have anybody else waiting in line here. I also attended the Penn State webinar yesterday, where Elliot and Pam were also in attendance. So I would say, in fairness to Penn State, there were a couple of points made by President Barron in the webinar. One is he acknowledged the political reality, current political reality of mandates, of trying to mandate a vaccination, and alluding to the fact that both the House and Senate of Pennsylvania passed anti-mandate legislation, but which was vetoed by the governor. But clearly, they recognized, the political reality of using the word mandate and the reaction that generates. Penn State clearly has a vested interest in keeping the legislature supporting Penn State because of the funds, taxpayer funds that the legislature does allocate to Penn State. And the other thing he mentioned, President Barron mentioned, was given this political reality, if they can achieve the same result using the current strategies that they've implemented, strongly encouraging vaccinations, requiring weekly testing for anyone who's not vaccinated, and imposing this masking mandate on campus in the inside of buildings. He was suggesting that this approach, without having a vaccination mandate, would generate the same outcome as a mandate would. Now, of course, that, to me, that's kind of wishful thinking, but we'll have to wait and see what happens. So I just wanted to get that out, that was Penn State's position that they expressed at that meeting. Like Pam, I'm kind of on the fence as well. Certainly, my wife is a Penn State professor, and she teaches classes, and she's certainly very concerned, as are many faculty at Penn State, as well as teachers in our school system who teach K through 12 and expect that there might be students in the room who are unvaccinated and may actually be carrying the COVID virus and spreading it in that confined space. So, I certainly appreciate that. I also recognize what President Barron was alluding to in terms of political reality. It's clear that the Penn State administration has spent a lot of time in developing these approaches to maximize the safety of their, the student body and the faculty and the staff. I would, in the end, I will support the motion, but also recognize that at this point, a letter from this municipality probably will not have that much of an effect on the decision-making process of the Penn State administration, but it simply is a public statement of how we stand as a Board of Supervisors and our concern for the welfare and public health of the citizens in our township and our broader community as a whole. So that's the end of my remarks. Pam, you wish to speak? Go ahead.
Yes, I want to first say thank you to Anita. She continues to be my hero stepping out on these issues because she was on this board the first person to address just wearing the mask mandate and what hassles and barriers that she went through just to get businesses, individuals to wear a mask. She stepped out on her own, did a website, had community and officials wearing masks to educate, and it caught on. It caught on. But she caught hell. And no sugarcoating this, just to bring it before this board, to wear a mask, to mandate that. So as we move forward to ask Penn State to mandate vaccinations, we're in for a fight, guys, and I'm in support of you. I will stand firm. And thank you, Anita, for taking charge. And also, I have to give President Barron and Penn State their initial due to try, the efforts that they're trying. Even in the webinar last night, they discussed not only dealing with the students on campus, but in our communities. That's a major step. So it's not just one community, it's all our communities involved. So as we move forward to this letter, I pray that ears are open, hearts are open, and that this moves forward. But it doesn't stop here. Thank you.
Okay. Elliot, you have a comment? Go ahead.
Well, I agree with both of you, and I'm glad they brought up the issues of concern and that and acknowledge that there are differences of opinion and things like that. On the other hand, though, I know that as a scientist, the doctor is an advocate of the idea of climate change, that it's real and the science is proven. And I don't think he'd tolerate somebody in the legislature saying, I don't think climate change is important, which we have some of those in the legislature. They don't believe it's occurring. And I don't think, suppose they wanted to stop the teaching of it. Certain things are nonsense.
Okay. Any final comments from anyone? Okay, seeing none, let's move to a vote. All those in favor of the motion, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No one opposed, the motion carries. Okay, moving on. Public safety report. Chief Jolly.
All right, thank you. The July 2021 Public Safety Report is included with your materials. Another busy month for our agency. We had 175 traffic stops, wrote 34 citations, wrote 4 parking tickets, handled 14 criminal arrests. Our bike patrol rode about 43 miles, did 108 business checks, and handled 1 incident. For some of the department notes, we had a female who was arrested for possession of heroin, fentanyl, and cocaine. Unfortunately, we're still seeing a pretty decent amount of heroin and fentanyl in our communities. The female and a friend appeared under the influence inside a township store. 41-year-old female was arrested for theft of services after failing to pay for services provided to her at a store here in the township. And we had a male who was arrested for simple assault and harassment stemming from a domestic violence incident. 4 individuals were arrested for driving under the influence, 1 for public drunkenness, and 2 for retail theft. Our officers successfully served 14 of the 16 warrants that they attempted, and they conducted 2 vacation home checks. Our officers did use force during one incident in July. They responded to a residence for a trespass in progress. They encountered a male who was heavily intoxicated inside. Our officers attempted to de-escalate the male and convince him that he needed to leave the residence. The male repeatedly called 911 while the officers were on scene and refused to exit the residence. The male resisted when officers attempted to apply handcuffs to his wrist. And our officers applied minor pressure to the male's joints to overcome his resistance and complete the handcuffing. The male was then transported to our station where he was evaluated by EMS and he denied treatment by EMS. He was then subsequently charged with trespass, disorderly conduct, and public drunkenness. And there were no injuries reported as a result of this use of force to the male or to the officers who were involved. For community relations, Officer Sunderland conducted a child safety seat check. He also provided traffic control for the annual Bike MS event that occurs, and they need some help usually at the Fox Hill Road and Burnell Road intersection. He did that on July 17th. And Officer Tuskovich attended the Patton Township Business Association meeting on the 28th, where he spoke about the upcoming safety fair. Just as a reminder to put it on your calendars, we're still pressing forward for an October 9th event in between the Target and Kohl's parking lots. And our officers continue to check the parks here in the township. The tactical team trained. All of our officers completed their mandatory firearms qualifications in the month of July, so we're good to go for the year. However, they continue to attend ranges so we can get more proficient and continue to practice with our firearms. And want to thank the PA Fish Commission for allowing us to use their range out at Fisherman's Paradise again this year. We had 3 officers attend emergency vehicle operation updates, which we have to do every 2 years. And Officer Tuskovich attended a school resource officer conference. I attended a records management system consortium meeting and met with Mr. Panko in regards to the children's safety fair and some of the planning. A lot of work goes into that event. A few letters we received from the community. The first one's from Chief Sean Weaver of the Bellefonte Borough Police Department, thanking Officer Schaefer and Officer Finocchio, who went down to the Bellefonte Cruise and Car Show in mid-June, helping them out with that event. A letter from an individual thanking Officer Sunderland for his appearance at the Kids' Day at the Fullington Bus facility down on Hobbycar Industrial Drive. And then a letter back in June I reported on May 27th, there was a student from the Park Forest Middle School who had been hospitalized for a few months. He came home from the hospital that day, and we'd organized for our officers to escort the family from the school back to their home after the students were able to welcome him back. Father was very appreciative of our efforts there and happy to hear that his son had successful brain surgery. So our thoughts and prayers are still with that family as he continues to recover. We did have a performance report on July 4th. Our officers responded to a call for an unresponsive female. Very early on, they were able to identify that she was in the advanced stages of an opioid overdose. They did administer naloxone and then continued to provide her care until EMS arrived, and she was transported to the hospital for more advanced care. But due to the quick actions of our officers, they were able to get her to the hospital and get her treatment where she was able to recover from that overdose. The record list of calls, we had a pretty significant jump up over 100 calls. June we had 355 up to 468 in July. The most frequent call for service remains health and safety EMS assists, followed closely by traffic calls. However, we did see a sharp increase in identity theft. And most of those are accounted to unemployment scams, employers receiving information saying an employee filed for unemployment when they're still currently employed, or residents, employees, are receiving checks in the mail saying that they applied for unemployment, which they never did. So we strongly encourage, if you are a victim of that, to report it to the police department. We also are going to direct you to report that to the PA Department of Labor and Industry, but we can walk you through that process. But just as a reminder for any scams in general, do not give out personal information, your date of birth, your social security number, any bank account information. The IRS and Social Security, including law enforcement agencies, do not collect money via iTunes or any kind of money order. So just to try to refrain from that. And if you think something's suspicious, give us a call and we'll help you navigate that process. And then lastly, just again, keeping with our spirit of transparency, I included the arrest distribution report beginning January of this year through July 31st. You'll see our breakdown of our arrests. And in that time period, we had 94 arrests. The first chart shows our arrests by race. 79 of our arrestees were white, 12 were African American, and 3 were Asian. So about 84% white, 12% African American, and 3% Asian. The second chart shows their ethnicity, where we had 90 that were not Hispanic or Latino, and 4 that were Hispanic or Latino. And then lastly, by gender, 65 of our arrestees were male and 29 were female. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Chief. Any questions for the chief? Comments? Pam, Rob, go ahead.
Thank you, Chief, for bringing up scams. As you know, I was targeted. I won a white Mercedes-Benz from the Public Clearinghouse. And just to get the word out, they're using seniors who are very polite, very patient. They're not asking your name, but they are scamming you through getting other information and getting you to give them information. I was fortunate enough to call Chief and Officer Jason, if I'm not mistaken, if I have the names right, and the education piece that I learned. I think we definitely need to do a little more of the educating our community of some of these scams. And I am so thankful that, you know, the education that I was afforded by our police department, I was able to get that information to other organizations. But it is now prevalent that they are targeting us. So thank you again, and hopefully we can get that word out.
And specific to your situation, Ms. Robb, we did put something on Facebook here at the township as well, so.
Any other comments or questions for Chief Jolly? All right, seeing none, thank you very much, Chief. Next item on the agenda is 4B, noise waiver request from Toft Trees Resort.
We received a request last week. Came about as a discussion between the Toft Trees management and Chief Jolly. As soon as Toft Trees understood they needed to get a noise waiver, they did request it. We did then ask them to meet with us earlier this week, so I, Chief Jolly, and our zoning officer, Ken Soder, met with Stefan Sharinka, the Toft Trees Resort, and his boss of Shaner Hotels. They gave us a much better idea of what they're doing. They're really, it's a marketing event. Well, it's a DJ music event. They're marketing it towards guests who they will be at their hotels. Shaner Hotels operates the Toft Trees Resorts plus 3 hotels over at Williamsburg Square. They're trying to provide some entertainment on the day before the football game, the first home football game. So this event would coincide with that. They're looking at the guests they have forget how many, several hundred rooms that they're looking at. Plus, they've been reaching out to apartment complexes along Toff Trees, especially the student-occupied ones. After that discussion and looking at numbers, township staff agreed that they had the capacity to handle it as part of their operations, and they do not need a temporary use permit. They are going to work with Chief Jolly, and they will be asking for additional police coverage, and they will be reimbursing the township for that. I recommend that we approve the noise waiver with several conditions, including limiting the event sales to 1,500 tickets. They've agreed to notify all residences within a quarter mile. We'll provide them that list. A couple other conditions, they agree that we can cite them without giving prior warnings after 10 p.m. if we need to, and that they will continue working with the police department on coordination to make sure everybody has a safe and fun event. With that, I'll ask the board to consider approving the noise waiver with those conditions.
Okay, comments from the board. I see two hands, Betsy Whitman first and then Doug Elliott. Betsy, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Should we add a decibel limit as one of the conditions?
We don't measure that. We could. We don't have any equipment. I don't know what number to tell you to add. Again, our requirement is unreasonable noise. I assume this is going to be something like outdoor concert. So I will say, they are pointing the stage to the west, away from all the residents and the dwellings in that area. We think it's a reasonable request to provide entertainment, in concert with a football game weekend.
Elliott,
Thank you.
I move approval.
is there a second?
I'll second it. Betsy Whitman.
Okay, moved and seconded. Let's continue with this questions and comments, discussion. Anita, go ahead.
Yes, I had a question. The last time we had requests for a noise waiver, and if you remember, we kind of got burned on it. It was that another Toff Trees one that went beyond the time limit. And I thought we had a short discussion about whether there, as part of our policy, should be a requirement for a deposit, a financial deposit of organizations when they're asking for noise waivers. I know that can't be done for this, but I'm just wondering, going down the line, if we might want to revisit that. That's all.
Yeah, if I can respond. Chief Jolly and I started that conversation. We haven't finished it. So, but, two of the conditions that are on here about the, agree that we're not going to provide any warnings and, make notifications, those are some of the things that Chief Jolly and I have talked about in addition to perhaps a deposit. But for now, we're satisfied with the conditions that we've had. Yeah, we'll bring that discussion back to the board at some point.
Okay, thank you.
Pam, Rob, go ahead.
Doug or Chief, do you have the authority to just shut it down instead of giving them a fine if the noise gets too loud for the community?
Well, I'm going to ask them to, we have representatives from Toff Trees here. I'm going to ask them to address the noise level. In essence, no. You're giving them a waiver. We don't have really a limit on that waiver. I guess if the event turns into a riot, then we do. Chief Jolly might have some other circumstances where we have, but just based on noise, I'm going to ask management, Stefan or Plato, to talk about, what's your expectation of?
The expectation is that, it's going to be similar to, us having 3 weddings and a golf tournament happening at the same time. Obviously the noise is going to be a little bit increased because it is a DJ event. I don't think it's going to be anything, out of control. We did ask Chief Jolly to provide us with, you know, anywhere between 4 and 6 police officers, which will be on site during the event. So I think that would, you know, constitute a controlled environment at that
Yeah.
point. If anything does get out of hand, I mean, they're going to be right there to control it.
You know, I'm going to say it's probably akin to being in the football stadium, that level of noise.
I don't think it'll be that loud. No. No, but like I said, it's a DJ event. We tried to do everything in our power to control the noise going, you know, towards the apartments. It's going to be kind of behind the Toff Trees building as well, which would almost act as a natural buffer for the noise. So we tried to do everything in our power to cut the noise down to the residents, along with, you know, obviously alerting all of the residents nearby with the letters to the addresses which you guys will provide us. So.
Yeah, currently, there's a level of trust we have to take on, that we trust that they're going to be good corporate neighbors. Maybe if we look at, you know, a deposit or something like that, when we revisit the noise ordinance, look at maybe there's something we should put in there that gives the police power to, you know, if things, you know, if they turn the amps up to 25 on a scale of 1 to 10, that, you know, then we can do something. But at this point, we're trusting that we're all going to be good neighbors at this point.
Yep, and we would obviously, you know, if this works out, we'd like to do it again, so we don't want to, you know, ruin it on the first try.
Yeah,
So-
and I think, you know, that was part of our discussion we had earlier in this week when we sat down with them. You know, we said, you know, if this goes well and there's no problems and it's something that, you know, people want to enjoy it and they want to do again and you want to offer it again, then, you know, we have a recipe for success. So like I said, Chief Jolly will have folks out there and they'll have Stefan's cell phone number, and if there's issues, we'll deal with it. Best I can tell you at this point.
Anita, go ahead.
Yes, I wonder in the future, with passing this, at that point, neighbors will be notified. I'm wondering if, in the consideration of future noise ordinance waivers, if the residents could be surveyed in advance. For instance, if there are a lot of young families with babies, they might object to the 10 p.m. Closing time. They might prefer 9 p.m. We're not getting any feedback from the residents in the area. Now, maybe they're all students or people who just love a good party. But I'm wondering in the future if we could rethink getting the neighborhood feedback before the board as part of the information that we have. Thank you.
Yeah, in the future, we can think about ways we could do that.
Any public comments? Anyone who's not on the board who wishes to speak to this? Okay, last call for comments. Seeing none, we got a motion, correct? Yes.
Correct, yeah.
So we'll move to a vote. All those in favor of granting this noise waiver, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed, so the motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Next item on the agenda is Public Works bid award for the Scotia Road full-depth reclamation and overlay.
Hello, everyone.
So Alex, go ahead.
Yes. This project, as stated in the agenda, is, the location is on Scotia Road between Meeks Lane and Marysville Lane. It includes 2,700 feet of full-depth reclamation. Full-depth reclamation is a process where the existing roadway asphalt and soil below will be ground up. Portland cement will be added, and water to form a very strong base for the roadway. This type of process is environmentally friendly because there is no material to be hauled away and replaced. The other 700 feet of the project will be a mill and overlay, where the roadway structure is better. We received 3 bids for this project, as stated in the memo, and my recommendation is that we proceed with the low bidder, Glen O'Hall Baker, for $190,850.
Okay, I'll accept the motion to approve this bid award, and then we'll have discussion. Elliot, go ahead. Elliot moved approval. Is there a second?
Second, Anita.
Anita T. seconded. Okay, discussion, questions or comments from anyone, board or non-board? Seeing none, then we'll move to a vote. All those in favor of the motion, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So let's move on to
George still with us?
rebrand, Public Works 5B, rebranding of University Park Airport. Should you start this, Doug, or you want?
Yeah, I'm going to start, and then
George?
I'm going to turn it over to George Downsborough, who's our representative on the Center County Airport Authority. Let me first start with the for your information, the item in the text box that I provided. There's something of an unusual situation out at University Park Airport. Penn State actually owns the airport. They operate everything out there except for the commercial airline terminal and the public parking lots, which are controlled by the Center County Airport Authority. I'm not sure of the history. It dates back several decades, but that's been the way it is. This is, as I noted, highly unusual arrangement for a public airport. Noted that there's some, each entity receives revenues from several different operations. CCAA does then share some of their revenues they get with Penn State to help them with their airside operations. And federal government frequently provides capital funding through grants, and they've gotten CARES Act money and things like that lately for upgrades to the facility. The question before us today is one of, let's call it rebranding. What do we call this airport? If you go into Expedia or Travelocity or one of those, and you put in State College, you get SCE as our airport, and it says it's at State College Airport, although the name of the airport is University Park Airport. So with that, we did receive a letter from the executive director for the CCAA asking for input. There was provided some graphics of what signs might look like for something that might be branded the State College Regional Airport. The CCAA did have a meeting last week with representatives from Penn State to discuss the issue. And I think with that, I'm going to ask George Downsborough, again, who said he's our representative, he's a former township supervisor, to come on and provide us some perspective from his position. Thanks, George.
Thank you, Doug. So the Center County Airport Authority Executive Director initially brought this topic to the board on 22 July, and he subsequently wrote the 28 July letter, which he delivered, as you can see, to the entities listed at the bottom of the letter, including Patton Township. His basic message was that he has been directed for some period of time to promote the airport as University Park Airport, and that his assessment was that this was not successful. Our communications entity is able to provide us statistics on how people land at the authority website, and overwhelmingly they search for State College. Searching for University Park is 5th or 6th on the list. So you have this situation where you buy a ticket to State College, Your bag gets tagged to SCE, which stands for State College, but the name of the airport is the University Park Airport. Now, I will point out that this is not a unique situation. If you take children to Disney World and fly into Orlando, you land at McCoy Field. If I go to visit my daughter in Omaha, I land at Epley Field. Chicago has O'Hare and Midway. New York has JFK and LaGuardia. So many different regions deal with this problem, but it's now being presented to the CCAA as an issue. I did fly into State College on the 9th of August. I listened very carefully. When the gate agent in Philadelphia opens the gate and boards the plane, it's advertised as service to State College. When the flight attendant welcomes you on the plane, she talks about a flight to State College. Yet when the captain starts his descent to land at our airport, he says he's initiating his descent to University Park Airport. Just interesting. If you could bring up on the screen there in the room, attachment 5B1, page 2, that's it. There are really two concepts here. Pages 2 and 3, you'll notice, say State College Regional Airport. I'm not sure that the CCAA really has the authority to rename the airport without additional coordination with both the FAA and Penn State. Now, if you go to pages 4 and 5, I think this is an attempt to sort of finesse the issue. They get State College on the sign, but they still refer to this as University Park Airport. I think this would be something that we could probably do today under the authority that we have to sign our road and to sign our terminal. If you read my report on the 12 August meeting, the university does seem open to a discussion on rebranding that might drive more business to the airport, might be beneficial to both Penn State's operations side as well as the authority. So I guess other than these two signage options, another option might be to do nothing until we have further discussions with Penn State. The 28 July letter from the executive director asks for input from the entities that the letter's addressed to. I'd be happy to carry that back, or you could submit formal input. It's really up to the board on how you want to handle this.
Okay, comments from the board on this proposal? Elliot, go ahead.
Well, I like the idea of changing it to State College Regional Airport or something like that. I think the reason why the pilots refer to it as University Park Airport is because the weather facility, the observations are taken at UNV, which is University Park Airport.
That's also the FAA name.
Yeah, right. And so that's why that is. But I think you solve the problem if you have University Park Airport in the sense, sort of like Medler Field at Lubrano Park. Most people still call it Medler Field. And they leave off the other part, even though that's part of the name to the baseball field.
Okay, so Elliot, you're in favor of the rebranding?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other board members wish to comment? Anyone opposed to the rebranding? Any board members opposed to the rebranding? No one's opposed. Any public comments? Okay, seeing none. I think, George, it seems the board, some members of the board either have no position, and others, including myself, support the rebranding to State College Regional Airport. So I think you can carry back to your committee, to your authority, I'm sorry.
Will do.
This is our
Thank you.
consensus. Sure. All right, let's
Bye
move.
with George.
Thank you, George. Now, we're going to skip the order in the agenda and move to item 7D, Council of Governments 2020 Program Plan and Capital Improvement Plan, because the COG representative that's here, Joe Vigilone, has to leave, and we kept him waiting here for 2.5 hours. I apologize, Joe, but go ahead. Doug, you want to introduce this?
Sure. We, every year as COG moves forward in their budgeting process, they put together their program plan and their capital improvement plan. The general forum then refers that to municipalities and asks for comments. Those comments will all go back to the Finance Committee, which meets early tomorrow morning. So we'll get these out to them. In terms of putting together the input, to go back to COG, they provide a matrix of the issues that they've identified in their program plan and asked municipalities to provide comments. I went through, if you look at item 7DR, which is revised, I have made comments in essentially the middle column there. Supervisors Whitman and Trevino have provided comments on other items, as you will see if you go down through the items, and you'll see them either labeled as DT or BW. At this point, if the board members have questions or comments, we can discuss those. Ultimately, what COG would like is a set of consensus comments from the board of supervisors. I don't think there's any conflicts between anything I provided and anything one of the supervisors provided. So one option would be to forward the comments that are enlisted in here as the consensus comments, but I will let the board provide me direction then.
Okay. Don't see any board members' hands raised. I'll go through, I have a couple that I just want to review with you, Joe. On the library capital improvement plan, my question was the note at the bottom of the spreadsheet, and this is the spreadsheet I'm talking about on the CIP, the capital improvement plan, the spreadsheet for the library. The note says the library capital fund balance was anticipated to be depleted by 2025. Yet when you look at the top of the spreadsheet, there's no indication that there's any depletion in the fund balance. So I wanted to know why there's a discrepancy between what's stated in the note and what's on the spreadsheet.
Joe Vigilone, COG Finance Director, and I think you asked me the easiest question of the night, and that's because I forgot to delete those 2 lines off of last year's. The new library director updated some projections and where funds were going to be spent, and it became solvent again, and I just forgot to eliminate those 2 lines.
Okay, so that note should be deleted, right?
And the report should be fixed, yes.
Yeah, okay. Let me see what else I have. I have it.
And I also want to call attention, Eric Norenberg is on the call as well. So he's on the Zoom call in case I have to leave. I apologize, I have it to be at the airport in about an hour. And thank you all for bumping this up so that I can be here for this.
All right.
Which airport is that?
I'm not sure anymore.
Moving on to, let me finish my questions, Betsy, and then you can have it next on your particular comments. Oh, next is on the Parks Capital Equipment Fund, C21. Looking at the bottom of the spreadsheet at the ending fund balances, in 22 end fund balance was 314,000, but you go down 5 years to bottom of 2026, fund balance is only 20,000. So the projection here is that the fund balance for the Parks Capital will be depleted in 5 years. So what are we going to do about that? Or what are your proposal for that?
I think there's a couple things working against this, creating this picture for you that you were looking at. The first is we are running a higher than usual beginning fund balance in 2022 and 2023 due to the delays in the purchase of equipment scheduled for Whitehall Road Regional Park. So theoretically, we have already funded those items in previous years, and we pushed off those purchases. So those delays are actually inflating the fund balance because we had assumed on our purchase schedule for those to be there. The second thing knocking it down is in this year there was a new purchase of a 15 passenger van in there. In that reduced the amount before because it wasn't really contemplated prior to this. But I can tell you, we look out further than 2025, 2026. So what you hit were a few heavy years and a low point in which we will start building up. Similar to what happens in the fire fund. The fire fund we will use up, and so you're paying about $350,000, $400,000 a year in contributions towards apparatus. When you buy an aerial engine, you're going to pay $1 million, $1.5 million. So for doing that, you're going to spend far more in a couple years. You'll build up the fund balance over a couple years, and then you'll spend far more in that year purchasing that vehicle. This is operating very similar to that.
Okay, I understand, thank you. Other thing, you mentioned the passenger van. Personally, I have a problem with that. That passenger van is to be used by Recreation and Parks to transport campers, according to what they said in their statement. And these are summer use. Parks already owns a passenger van, 2009 version, and this request for a new van is not a replacement, but in addition to the current van. I probably would not have had an issue if this was a replacement van for the 2009, because now it's already what? It's 11, 12 years old. But we're talking about a vehicle that's going to be sitting in a parking lot for 9 months of the year, assuming its use is primarily in the summer. And we already own a van, and I guess if they needed a second van, they kind of alluded to rentals, so renting as needed. And I didn't think the justification that was presented was sufficient to convince me that we needed to have 2 vans, especially if they're only going to be used in the summertime. So you can pass that on. I'll probably say that tomorrow morning at the Finance Committee meeting. I think I had another comment on pools capital. Similarly, there's a request to purchase and outfit a mobile concession truck. The justification says that they've had a lot of difficulty in recruiting a concessioner to come in and provide, concession sales at the pools, full service, and not just Italian ice, but full service. So that's the justification. But again, my reservation is that this is a truck that's going to be sitting in a parking lot for 9 months of the year. And having COG own and operate the truck, unless they'll rent it out to a concessioner, which is a different story. But having COG COG owned and operated concession truck. We're talking about additional personnel, especially someone who's the manager. I mean, you know, part-time help is not, to me, is not a big deal, big issue, but you have to have someone who's going to manage that van that may be a COG employee. So that's another one I didn't feel there was sufficient justification.
If I can speak to that one real quickly.
Yeah.
The advantage of this being the 6th meeting we're going to is we can get a feel for the first 5 before coming here. Your van comment previously, you're the first person to have discussed the van, but I can tell you on the concession truck, we've heard about it from all the other participating municipalities in one way or another. So I do not feel as if your comment is inconsistent on what we've heard from other places on the concession truck.
Okay. Betsy, do you have anything you wish to expound upon on your comments?
No, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. But I'm saying overall, I want to say overall that I'm looking at everything now through a very stringent climate lens, a greenhouse gas emission lens. We got some, as we all know, very critical information within the last week or two from the International Panel on Climate Change, and then an independent research study on, I forget but the acronym is the AMOC. It's essentially the circulation of waters in the Atlantic Ocean, the Gulf Stream being the main part of that we all know. And the latter one, the research on these circulating waters, was very, very disturbing. And, you know, some people are very, very concerned there may be dire consequences within 20 years. So my comments were, and I called out certain vehicle purchases where they were not indicated as being either electric or hybrid. And first of all, I want to compliment, I guess it was Parks and Recs who had a lot in code, that where they can, it appears that everything is going to be electric or hybrid. There are a number of instances where I have no idea if it even exists, an electric or hybrid, but I would really suggest that we take a very hard look at any vehicle that we purchase that is still gasoline powered. And if we can go to a less robust vehicle that is the hybrid, I would strongly urge that we do that. The other point, mostly with Parks and Rec, I guess, is looking at the same criteria of electric for the small motor tools that they use, like the brush clipper, and there's an aerator, a Z-mower. So they may not even be on the market yet, but it's amazing what happens when you start asking for those. It can force the market. So those were that underlay all my comments.
Okay, Eric Nuremberg, COG Exec Director, I think he wants to answer some of your comments. Go ahead, Eric.
Sure. I just wanted to voice our support for the goals that Ms. Whitman has outlined. We have been looking at the opportunities for electric vehicles in a number of different areas, and as you noted, there are some types of equipment that are not on the market yet in electric or not suitable for the type of work that we're doing. For instance, in terms of fire apparatus, those are big, heavy vehicles, and there are some that are on the market now, according to Steve Baird, that are electric, but they are really limited range. So they're more suitable for an urban environment where you're only going a few miles, operating, and then going back and being able to charge before your next outing. They would have a range of, say, 35 miles, for example. some of the equipment, we look, whenever we are going out for that type of equipment in Parks and Rec or in the fire area, to be able to see what we can do. We have in Parks and Rec been testing an electric mower to try to get a feel for how we can use it, what the duration is, you know, what are the situations where we have to recharge, bring it back to the shop, that sort of thing. The other thing that I'll make note of, in the code operation, the Facilities Committee and the Finance Committee have supported a pilot program starting next year where we'll purchase 4 plug-in hybrid vehicles and the charging capacity for that to get some experience, pilot it the first year, and then be able to make some decisions about this time next year regarding expanding that charging capacity, because that is a significant investment to go beyond those 4 at the COG building, and there's some decisions we'll be needing to make in terms of master planning for the future facility needs for COG, administration code, and so on. And the same question comes up in the case of the borough fire station. To install that charging capacity for many vehicles to be able to respond at once is a significant investment, and there's been talk for many years, probably some of you are aware, about potentially moving that station. So we need to make sure that we're making smart investments relative to the charging capacity for those vehicles. But we do share your commitment, Betsy.
Yeah. And I might also comment that the technology is changing so fast, again, with the demand, that we may see very different projection, you know, when we look at the next SIP in a couple of years. So it's exciting to watch. But I wish it would come faster.
Right, and the environment for passenger vehicles and mass market vehicles, SUVs, things like that, have been moving very quickly. The types of vehicles that we're talking about, fire trucks and some of our mowers, we don't buy for, you know, every 8 to 10 years in some cases. So we have to make a smart decision now, and then when the time comes, hopefully, as you say, the market has shifted.
Okay.
Batteries.
Thank you, Eric and Betsy. Any other board members wish to make a comment or have a question? Any public comments or questions?
Dan?
Seeing none, is...
Joe's got a comment.
Oh, I'm sorry, Joe, I wasn't even looking at you. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, Betsy had made a couple other comments up in the general comments that I wanted to call attention to because I thought they were very good questions. The first one was what operational savings were realized during the COVID period. As you know, with the Finance Committee, we gave those monthly trending reports as what we were doing with savings and whether or not we were going within, 5% of budget, 10% of budget in historical time frame. So while we did not get down into the granular data within heating or cooling expenses or transportation costs, we were able to determine on a COG-wide budget that we were doing okay, and we just suspended that report. So we had been reporting on that on a monthly basis through the end of June to give you that information. And then the second, she had requested about when, if ever, does it make financial sense to install solar panels on COG buildings once COG is purchasing electricity through the solar power purchase agreement. One of the items that's going to be coming before Patton Township, and Peter Buck will actually be speaking to this at the general forum next week, is authorizing your rep from Patton Township or the rep from COG to vote to recommend a consultant to State College Area School District to start the process moving with the solar power purchase agreement. And I'm hoping that that question will be answered within that consultant's workload.
Okay. Thank you. Eric? Go ahead.
There are just a few other questions that were noted in the handout that I'd be happy to hit real quick if there's time for the board. But there was a question regarding the standards for the HVAC systems. The recommendations are based on ASHRAE standards, EPA, and OSHA for indoor and outdoor air circulation to provide more fresh air for those buildings. And the COG building was approximately 20 years ago, and the library about 10 years ago when those systems were installed. So the standards have been updated, and it's been even more important for the safety of the staff and visitors to make sure we're getting plenty of fresh air into those buildings and that the filtering is meeting today's standards. There was a question, flip to the next page here, regarding the fences at Hess Field. That's been a four-field project. 2 will be finished this year, and then the next 2 are one next year and the 4th the following year. And I think...
Well, Eric, I think that was my question. There was in the spreadsheet, it was showing a municipal contribution of $15,000 for 5 years. And yet you're saying that the field's fence replacements will be done in 2 years. So why is there an additional 3 years of municipal contribution?
I need Joe's help on that, but the original project was supposed to start in 2020, and then it got deferred to 2020 until 2021 because of the COVID. So 2 of the fields will be done this year, and I'm not sure about the 5th.
Well, you don't have, if you don't have an answer right now, I'm just alerting you to that that's a question, perhaps needs to be clarified.
Sure. And then the last, just note to Betsy's question about flush toilets, it's Hess Field that does not have the flush toilets in the restrooms, and we use porta potties there. So that's the one that we still want to get to eventually, is to put in restrooms at that field. So, but we'll be happy to address the other questions and comments in the collective guide when we put that together for all of them.
Okay, any other comments or questions? Pam, Rob? Yes, go ahead, Pam.
To Eric or Joe, as Betsy brought up hybrid and electric vehicles, how are we looking into the charging stations once we purchase any of these items?
So for the COG building, we're setting up, we have the capacity within the electrical system of the building to do up to 4 vehicles at once. Otherwise, we would have to upgrade the distribution feed to the building and add a transformer, and so that adds significantly to the expense. So that's what we're wanting to take this as a kind of a first step forward to do the pilot next year. Beyond that, it's certainly the capacity for charging at any of our facilities is an important question, and that will need to be looked at, when the time comes. For instance, with park maintenance, that's a leased space, and so we want to make sure that what we're investing in is something that could be moved to another facility if we end up buying or building elsewhere.
Thank you.
Elliot, go ahead.
I think the use of electric vehicles for the agency is an excellent idea. And one of the things with the vehicles is that they're always pretty much coming out of the same place and they're going to the same basic areas. It's not like they're taking some vacation and they're going to be stranded 200 miles away on the way and worried about, is there a charging station? Here we're going to know there's a charging station in a certain place and what the capacity of vehicles are. And so that problem is solved automatically.
Any other questions for Joe or Eric? Okay, let me just ask the board then, are you, board members, satisfied with the comments that have been made and entered into this grid, and that we can pass that on to COG as our board's responses? I don't see any objections, so you can take this as what you have in your hands is our responses, and I'll see you all tomorrow morning at 8:30.
And thank you again.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your patience, Joe and Eric. Yes,
Thank you for accommodating.
Yeah.
Thank you.
sure. All
Safe
right,
travel.
moving on. Let's go backwards in the agenda to where we left off. And
7A.
it's number 6, well, no, number 7. 7, administration update on proposed Center County Human Relations Commission.
Yeah, I'll just make this a quick update. I included a couple of documents that are under review. One is a draft regional discrimination ordinance. This is Ferguson Township's draft. We move forward, we would be looking at something very similar to that. Also was a copy of a memorandum of understanding or agreement between, this one's set up between Bellefonte, Ferguson, and the Borough State College, but we would obviously add Patton to it, and perhaps others. Those documents are under review by solicitors for each of the municipalities involved. The solicitors are going to try and get that review done by the end of August. So we should be looking at sometime in September or October, looking at a draft non-discrimination ordinance specifically for Patton Township, and also an intergovernmental agreement to form a local human relations committee. If we can get all those, we can get those documents put together and everything in place by October, and then we can, or even if we don't, we're still moving forward, we'll have to include funding in our 2022 proposed budget to finance that. And I think we've got a fairly good handle on what's needed. It won't be a lot of money, but there'll be some initial money that will be needed. And then hopefully, if everything goes smoothly, at December 8th meeting, we should be able to hopefully be ready to appoint a representative to this so that they can get started in 2022. If you have any other questions at this point, try to answer those. But otherwise, that's just an update of where we're at in the process.
I have yes, Pamela and Betsy, I'll get to you. There's one small thing I noticed on the intergovernmental agreement that we were presenting, which of course just says Bellefonte, Ferguson, and State College Borough. But on the third page, item 10 says, no member of the commission shall hold any elective office. That just simply alerts us that when we join this commission, we'll be appointing a citizen, a non-supervisor to be the member, our designee, our member on this commission. I don't have a problem with that. I just wanted us to be aware of that. Okay, Pam and then Betsy. Pam, go ahead.
I've attended several of these meetings, and there are officials on this commission. So for that statement that none of our board members can be a part of it is concerning. And Doug, is there a time limit or a deadline that this commission has to be answered to?
Well, just to clarify, the body that Joanne, I can't remember, get her last name.
Tosti
Yeah.
Vasey.
Yeah, Tosti Vasey.
Tosti Vasey is an advisory commission to the State Human Relations Commission. So
Right.
that's not an adjudicating body. They're just an advisory body. So what we would be forming is a brand-new body that would be, would look at cases that could be brought by residents of the member communities. Again, it would only be, even though we're calling it a Center County HRC, it would only take cases from people that are residents that are residents of Patton Township, Ferguson Township, State College Borough. So no, this is a brand new operation. There's no deadlines that anybody else is setting. We can set our own deadlines, but at this point, The goal is to get this in place to start in 2022. But we have to check all those boxes and go through all the steps that are listed here on page 10 of the agenda too.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Okay, Betsy, go ahead.
Yeah, I would, first of all, like to suggest that at some point we invite Joanne Tosti-Basie to our meeting to give an overview of this Human Relations Commission and how it differs from the advisory committee. I had detailed conversation with her, and we talked about things such as the cost and why it's better to have 3 or 4 municipalities involved instead of the one, which the State College Borough was sort of the model for. They had a difficult time. The other is the accessibility and visibility, the advantage of having a Human Relations Commission here in Center County versus just right now, we have to take all the cases to the state. And then by having one locally, there are actually additional protections that citizens will get that they will not get, that are essentially not answered or served if you have to go to the state. And yeah, and then I specifically do want to mention that there is one citizen, Don Sestero, who has been following the Human Relations Commission issue closely, and he's reached out to me with several questions. So I won't read all those at this point. We will, I just didn't get them in time to distribute to everybody. We will have those available for the next meeting or the meeting at which we have, if we so choose to, invite Joanne Tosti-Basie to speak about this. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments or questions? Okay, so you have the sense of the supervisors who continue to progress with this. Now, I'm going to exercise my prerogative again and call a brief recess, a 5-minute recess. So I am calling to order again this meeting of the Patton Township Board of Supervisors. So next item on our agenda is 7B, Mid-Year Financial Report by our Director of Finance Administration, Mr. Larry Pegger. Take it away, Larry.
All right, hopefully everybody can hear me.
Yes.
So I've completed my annual review of the revenues and expenditures as of June 30th with my review of my estimate for the year ended. So we can discuss that. Just a few things in the overview. I removed from my estimates the American Rescue Plan Act funds that we received of $827,145 since they weren't in the budget. I also removed the PIB loan proceeds of $1,837,500 and the corresponding expenditures for the Fox Hill Burnell Road intersection of $1,294,500 in my calculations. And also they weren't in the budget. So when I compare the estimated year-to-date revenues and the year-to-date expenditures, I'm taking those numbers out so they don't skew the findings. So overall, it looks like our revenues are going to come in at 3% over what we budgeted, and our expenditures are going to come in at about 2.75% under what we budgeted. So some of the major items on the revenue side is our earned income LST tax are tracking at 6% below budget. However, I think that we might see that come back a bit with Penn State coming back into session for the fall. So we'll get the some of the stores will open back up. The restaurants will get back into full capacity. The police program reimbursements are tracking less than budget. That's mainly due to those. The major part of those reimbursements are for the school resource officer program, which the schools were closed on in the spring, and they'll be back open full-time in the fall, so we should be seeing a reimbursement for our school resource officer. Also, another big item is the Penn State football games, where we get reimbursements for our police being at the football games. Obviously, we didn't have any blue-white game in April, but I would expect we're going to see some, we'll see it when Penn State football comes back in the full swing in the fall, next month actually. The health insurance refund came in at about $190,000 over budget. We budget this number based on information we get from Benecon, and then it came in better than we expected. On the expenditure side, our salaries and benefits are a little bit below budget in some departments due to reclass to COVID-19. We're not reclassing the COVID-19 anymore, so we won't see that happening for the second half of the year. But in the first half of the year, we did have some of that. And that came to the tune of $36,200. That was all a reclass of salaries and benefits. Expenditures are expected to be under budget by about $190,000 due to the delay in hiring the communication specialist and the one additional police officers. So with that in mind, like I said, it looks like our revenues are going to come in at 3% over budget, and our expenditures are going to come in at 2.75%. So if there's any questions, I'll take those now.
Any questions, board members?
Real quick, were you surprised at the results, Larry?
I was a little bit surprised, but happy that it didn't look like we were going to come in under budget and on revenue and over budget on expenditures. So,
Yeah.
good job on all of us in the budgeting process, I guess.
Well, I would say good job, Larry, on keeping us on track here. No, I don't see any further questions or comments, so thank you very much, Larry. And let's move on to the board input for the 2020-2024 CIP. Doug?
Yeah, we've been asking the board to provide input. Betsy did provide some comments that were included came out with the supplement. I'm gonna share my screen, Alex. I did actually, can you see that? Yeah. I did put some responses to it, Betsy. I'm not gonna go through them right now. I'll send this out to board members tomorrow. I think I responded to most of those. In terms of hybrid electric vehicles, that's something we'll explore here over the next month or two. We'll see what's out there and see what options are available. But I think, like I said, I provided, I think, responses to most of those. Betsy had looked at a couple recommendations to look at some storm drains in Park Forest. I'll get with Betsy and get some more information about that. But under number 9, Betsy had asked a question about if funds exist to underwrite partial membership to pools for families of lower income. That's something that the board could do if you had a mind to. We can put, I need somebody to give me a number for how much you're thinking. We can put something into the budget and work with Center Region Parks and Rec to make that available to them. Under number 2 there, on the second page, my second page is raised priority of bike pass. If that's something the board would like to do, we could set up something that has some dedicated funding, similar to what we do with parks. For our parks development, we dedicate 0.7 mils of our real estate taxes that we collect. 0.7 of that is dedicated and directed solely to park development. If the board wanted to look at doing something similar to that for bicycle paths, we could. I will tell you, bicycle paths are expensive. They're about $1 million a mile to do paved bicycle paths. Unlike roads, there's no funding source like liquid fuel taxes. So without grants, it's almost impossible to, to do a lot. But we could start setting money aside every year and then program out years. That would be one way to raise the priority of bike paths. And another comment that Betsy had was replace the municipal office sign, bigger, better, more prominent location. That's something that we can also look at as part of the CIP process. So those things will, as we do, we'll write up something for each of these projects that Betsy's proposed. We'll put it into the CIP. The first run of the CIP, everything goes in there. And then we come out with a prediction of, can we do it under the tax rates we currently have, or do we have to increase the tax rate to finance that, and then the board can make decisions and provide direction after we look at that first run. Last year when we did that, we noted we were gonna probably require some increases, and the board said no increases, so we took several projects and pushed those out from 2021 to out years beyond that. So I'm gonna stop sharing at this point. Like I said, I'll share this document with the board members tomorrow, and we'll get it into the agenda packet. But that's the input I have. If anybody else has other ideas, give it to me as soon as we can so we can get it into the CIP. This is the last time I'm going to ask you, so.
Betsy, you have your hand raised, go ahead.
Thanks. One of the things that drove my question about underwriting the cost of pool membership was when I read the area police report that the university did, that it showed Patton as having an 18% population in poverty. And it occurred to me, I actually had a big question over that, meant to ask it during that report, how that poverty rate is computed, and do they consider students in that? Because I noticed that Ferguson had a large poverty rate, or I think it was, Ferguson, Patton. Yeah, do you know, Doug, offhand, just if that was an accurate assessment of poverty?
I'd ask you to send me a copy of the report or a link to it.
Oh, it's the report that is in our agenda, the one that the university did that Emil Cunningham gave.
Okay, I hadn't looked into it. I couldn't tell you. If it's based on the census, if it's based on returns from census or census estimates from the American Community Survey, I will say it probably does include students.
Students?
So anybody it would probably include anybody who reported a zero income, which would, in our case, include lots of students.
Well, that's a problem. I mean,
yeah, it's one of the things that skews our demographics a little bit. Comes into play when you look at affordable housing too.
Right, okay. But we just need to be aware of that.
Yeah.
Figure out what statistics are important to us. Not that I don't think students, whatever.
Well, they have far more disposable income than.
Some of them do. No, I mean, most of them do, not all of them.
Yeah.
There are some really impoverished students, but I didn't mean to denigrate them. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, let's move on. Next agenda item is 7E, American Rescue Plan update.
So yes, as we've talked about several times, the federal government is sending us $1.654 million over the next 2 years. We've got our first tranche earlier, I think in late July. I provided, there was a schedule in there that I keep updating with our internal schedule for how we're going to work through this process with deciding how to expend these funds, and also I've included dates, target dates that are part of the law, like October 31, 2021, we have to report what we've done so far to the U.S. Treasury. Recall we have till the end of 2024 to obligate all the funds, and we have to spend them by the end of 2026. The process we've been going through has been one of reaching out fairly widely and collecting information and input, not only from the Board of Supervisors, but people on our ABC committees, the general public, and also partner agencies, I've been calling them, like COG is the main one, and some of the others. COG collected a whole bunch of information together and gave us quite a list of recommendations. For the general public and township employees and ABC members, I created a survey, a short survey in SurveyMonkey, and asked them to provide input. You had some, I got, fix my screen here, sorry. Primarily, the people that answered questions were all township residents. There were a few business operators, but mainly they identified themselves as residents. Uh-oh. Oops, the survey results didn't all get, sorry, I apologize for that. I only got one page, there were more of that. But anyhow, there was a question in the survey, question 3. You got question 3, evidently just, okay. If you got a paper copy of the agenda, you didn't get all the information. So under question 3, there was opportunity for people to give kind of open-ended ideas. I said, you know, what are your ideas for spending this money? And then question 4 was kind of, I asked people to, there were the categories that were identified in the American Rescue Plan law were those categories, and I asked people to rank them, and as you can see, nothing really jumps out from that ranking. But if you go back up to question 3, and I went and I downloaded all the individual responses, I went through them and kind of put them into the separate bins of various types of activities, and infrastructure improvements came out by far on top. Now that infrastructure improvement included several categories. If you look at the smaller chart on the bottom there of page 12 on the agenda, infrastructure bikeways, we got almost 30 responses out of the total of a little over 70. There were quite a few people who are advocating for expanded broadband or cell service, and then road, stormwater, and water infrastructure were also included. So infrastructure improvements, which we could use our replacement of lost revenues funds for those, was the most popular. Support of businesses and or workers in many various forms, including grants and premium pay and things like that, was number 2 on the list. The pandemic-specific support was support for vaccinations, testing, things like that, and there were a few of those in there were get ready for the next pandemic too, so I thought that was good. People were looking ahead. Support residents directly was different kinds of aid that would be, or cash aid, other types of things that would be given directly to residents. Support township staff. There were various ideas that were put out there to buy equipment and other things, and then you can read through the rest of the list. Also included in the agenda materials were some Dan Trevino had provided some high-level ideas to use ARP funds to cover the replace revenues, which we found most of that we can use that at least for 2020. I think Larry determined that we had 1.2 million of lost what the American Rescue Plan Act would define for us as reduced revenue. So we can use that amount for things that are outside the particular funded items in the ARP plan. And then Supervisor Anita Tees provided several more ideas of things of potential projects, first-time home buyer funds, safeguarding existing affordable house, and then a couple of support Center County Housing and Land Trust, and then working with COG on a potential needs and gaps analysis. So that information was provided by those 2 board members. And then, as I noted, item 7E4 were items from the COG. Eric had collated all those from all the separate agencies, fire, planning. Just to note that the planning projects are regional projects, so they would not be looking for Patton Township to fund the total amount that's listed under each of those items, but our share, typically our share of a COG project is 20%, around there, 21, depending on which exact formula we're looking at. So there are several pages of those from planning, parks and rec, emergency management. Emergency management also included some support for Center Region Lifelink, who had revenue losses from COVID, and then library and COG admin. So that's the list of items that we have, that I have collected. At that point, I think Ms. Burnett may want to speak, make comments, and then other than that, I'll look to the board to provide me what direction they'd like to at this point.
Hi, go ahead, Valerie.
Okay. I'd like to present to the board a petition signed by 104 people over the course of 5 days. There was an online petition with limited reach that garnered 29 signatures, and an in-person petition that prompted 75 people to stop along the Bellefonte Rail Trail during the 10 hours that I stood at the intersection of the Bellefonte Rail Trail and Rocky Top Lane. The petition reads, we, the citizens of and visitors to Center County, call on local government, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and federal agencies in the face of urgent action needed to avert even worse disasters related to climate change, to prioritize, support, and fund completing the Bellefonte Rail Trail, active transportation, and complete streets. Currently, the incomplete and unmaintained section of the Bellefonte Rail Trail in Patton Township is heavily used. An average of 70 people per hour were counted using the Bellefonte Rail Trail during the 2019 football season. Adopting, prioritizing, and implementing a complete streets policy would enable us to encourage safe and seamless passage for people walking, running, bicycling, rolling, and using mass transit. Offsetting the cost of mass transit by offering fare-free bus passes would enable and encourage more people to use CATA. I strongly urge our government leaders to utilize the American Rescue Plan funds to help make it easier for more people to reduce their personal driving and to increase their use of mass transit, walking, running, rolling, and bicycling. Let's do this for the health of people and the health of our planet. We can do better. The majority of people walking, bicycling, scootering, and running stop to listen, read, and sign this petition. The enthusiasm for this petition matches the findings of the survey regarding the use of American Rescue Plan funds. People want more parks and bikeways, however, it's not limited to parks and bikeways. The majority of people that I spoke with view active transportation and mass transit the kind of direct climate action necessary to reduce our carbon emissions. I would like to add that this ties directly into the Center Region Climate Action Plan, sector of sustainable transportation, specifically draft objective number 3, align land use and housing with transportation infrastructure to increase access to walking, biking, and public transit. This trail already exists near some of the densest housing in Patton Township. Having worked in an elementary school next to an oil refinery, I saw firsthand the illness, especially asthma and cancer, associated with the fossil fuel industry. Children, their families, and colleagues became sick, and too many died. The rate of asthma in that community was 4 times the state. The state was 2 times worse than the nation. Those numbers mean nothing compared to the long lines of children that stood outside the nurse's office for asthma medication on a daily basis. Now we have the hazy smoke signals from the west, not only affecting our air quality, but also whispering of the pain, suffering, displacement, and death of those caught in the crossfire of heat domes, droughts, and wildfires. The wildfires increase air pollution, causing even more severe cases of COVID-19. These are the types of multiplier effects that come with our climate crisis. The smoke signals are punctuated here with heavy and persistent rains predicted through climate change models. a constant reminder that climate change is here, it is going to get worse, and we need to change our ways now. As Christina Dahl, co-author of the report, Too Hot to Work, stated in an interview, our first line of defense still needs to be reducing carbon emissions. Here in Patton Township, the most direct and immediate way we can reduce our collective carbon footprint is to complete our sidewalks, bike paths, and trails, promote active transportation, and encourage more people to use mass transit. I firmly believe that as a caring community, we can do this for the health of people and the health of our planet. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we get a copy of the petition and your signatures? You'll give to the manager. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Burnett.
Can you repeat the name of the speaker? That was great. Thank you.
Oh, Valerie Burnett. She had spoke before to us about.
Sorry, Valerie, I didn't recognize you. I didn't hear your name. That's great. Thank you, Valerie.
Yeah.
It's Betsy.
I should have repeated her, her name.
I couldn't hear the name, and
I said I should have. I don't think I did.
no, that's right.
Anita Tees, go ahead.
Yes, I would like to thank Valerie Burnett. That was an excellent presentation, and the number of signatures that you have gathered is actually more than the number of people who responded to the survey that the township did. I commend Doug for doing the analysis of it. I'd like to ask if the staff could do an assessment of the cost of what it would take to pay, how much money would it take to make the rail trail, to go over those sections that need improvement, I guess with pavement, so that we know what kind of money we're looking at, whether it's all Patton Township money or whether we also, in the regional focus on improving bike trails throughout the region, if we seek partners in paying for it. But I think the place to start is to have a financial estimate of what it would cost, and therefore look at that as we identify uses for the American Rescue money. Thank you.
Okay, Elliot, go ahead.
You're muted, Elliot.
No, I agree with what Anita said, and I think we should go ahead and calculate what this would cost and how we can get it done. And I think a lot of these things are needed regardless of the amount of climate change we have, but climate change just makes it more urgent.
I'd like to just jump in and
Betsy,
say
go ahead.
that a few minutes ago, Doug said it would be about $1 million a mile to put a bike path in, on average.
Well, how long is the section that we're talking about with this trails?
I have some more detailed cost estimates for those bike trails, so. I don't have them with me right now, but we'll put those into the CIP or ARP plan. So, yeah, we'll bring that information forward.
Could I add one more comment?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. While pavement sounds really good, overwhelmingly, the people that I spoke with said that they really want to see it maintained and upgraded to the gravel or aggregate. I'm not sure what the technical term is, but they specifically said they did not want it to be pavement or asphalt because that's pretty hard on the knees.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
Now, the timetable that Doug presented shows a September board meeting, develop a short list of options to fund. I mean, we've been presented with data here that we can all digest, and then come back in September to discuss more detailed proposals that we, we want to generate. In other words, narrow things down and with some funding options or cost estimates for the different kinds of proposals. Is that satisfactory with the board? Take this up again next month? All right, I see agreement. So that would probably be the September 22nd meeting? That'd be sufficient.
Probably. If people have ideas for things they'd like to see, specific projects, and they need help with figuring out, a dollar number, contact me and we can work through that.
Yeah.
I may have that information already. Other things like, things along the line that Anita had talked about, she had already put some dollar figures to that. So if you have, like a, outreach to business, I can't give you a number, but you can put a number to it. Somebody's gonna have to put a number to it at some point. So if you wanna do business grants, you figure out what you think for the first cut might be the appropriate number, whether that's $50 or $500,000. Somebody has to put a number on it to start with, so I'll leave that to you.
Okay. Elliot, you have a comment?
Just one in terms of sustainability, is that we should consider whether it's feasible at all to have winter maintenance on any of the bike and walking paths, because if you can only use the facilities part of the year, then the rest, the need needs to be addressed in some other way. And do we have enough mass transit or other facilities to soak up that need for the times when we can't actually do the biking and walking?
Okay. Anything else? All right. So get your specific ideas to Doug before we meet again in September 22nd. All right, moving on. Next item is proposal to adopt the visioning phrase, Patton Township, a place for all. Anita, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. As you know, a vision statement is meant to be aspirational. It's something that if it was achieved, what would you want to see? And I bring this before the board because the Housing Task Force has identified the essence of what will be in the new CNET videos that will be starting to air in October. And because, what is it that Patton Township might hope for should we be able to achieve the housing opportunity for our workforce and for people who can't afford to live where they work. But in thinking about it, that phrase, a place for all, seems to me to be more broad-based, that as this board has listened throughout this year to people who've come before us, as we were asked to designate and support the month of May for Asian American Pacific Month, as we've looked at various, even today's the Human Relations Commission, acceptance of all people, justice, and resolution, that what I've heard in various factors, even in our parks, that the debate about what park amenities should be for which people, the phrase, a place for all, seems to resonate in many ways. And because that phrase will be put out for the public through our CNET videos, and because we want to have it coordinated with the website, with the social media, I wanted to put it before the board to see if we could adopt it in multiple ways. I could, and again, I don't want to supersede the excellent work of our new communications person, Sophie, and Larry's plans, but I could see the phrase, Patton Township, a place for all to prosper, and it would be a business promotion, a place for all to work, a place for all to play with the parks, a place for all to learn with the schools. So I put this before you. I don't know that if there's policies on adopting a vision phrase or if it's more of an informal thing, but we're going to be putting it out already to the public for, because one of the things the Housing Task Force is very sensitive to from past experiences, letting the public know that we're starting a major discussion about housing. We're not just plopping this on them. And these spots are going to be running not just in October, but into the new year. And so I put it before the board. It would be great if we could have a coordinated communications theme about a place for all. So that's what I've brought. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. Board members, let's see, you need to stop sharing screen, Alex, please. Thank you. Board members, any comments, questions? Betsy Whitman, go ahead.
Whoops, I'd like to move that we adopt the phrase Patton Township, a place for all, as a visioning phrase or whatever we want to call it.
Second.
The motion is moved and seconded to adopt Patton Township, a place for all, as our, quote, visioning phrase. Discussion. Yes, Pam, go ahead.
I think it's an excellent description of who we are. And this is going to go very far, very far. So thank you, Anita, and to your Housing Task Force for this wonderful initiative.
Any more discussion? Any public comments? I don't think dog counts.
My dog likes it.
In favor. All right, ex officio member says, yeah, go for it. Let's go ahead and have a vote. All those in favor of the motion, raise your hand, say aye.
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 All raise their hands, so the motion carries. Thank you, Anita. Next is consent agenda. Is there any item on the consent agenda that a member of the board wishes to pull for separate discussion? All right, seeing none, I'll accept a motion to approve the consent agenda. Betsy Whitman moves.
I'll make that motion.
Is there a second?
Second, Pam Robb.
Second, Pam Robb. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll vote on the motion to accept the consent agenda. All those in favor, raise your hand, say aye.
Aye.
Everybody raise their hand, said aye, so motion carries. Next item, manager's report.
Included correspondence, comments we had put together last month to Patton Township on their zoning ordinance update, and there was also then an announcement from State College Meals on Wheels. They had their 50th anniversary celebration on Monday. Under announcements, again, for folks, if you're having mosquito issues in your neighborhood, you can contact the Center County Mosquito Disease Control Program. Will do some trapping to check the quantity, the number of mosquitoes in there, and they have the ability to do spraying if needed. Note the board members, Municipal Leadership Summit for Pennsylvania Municipal League is October 7 and 9. I think we've registered several folks, but if you're still on the fence, let us know. Let you also know that we do have a new case of oak wilt on Oakley Drive, and Public Works folks are working on taking care of that. I included an update on gypsy moth, our gypsy moth program, such as it is for this year. Our observations are most of the gypsy moth caterpillars died in July. We think it's due to some natural pathogens that are in the soils around here. But just to make sure, we will be doing an egg mass survey in September and October, and based on the results of that survey, if we think we need to do spraying in next year, we've already identified areas that we may need to spray and are out getting pricing on spraying if needed. If we do that, spraying typically would take place in May. So we'll keep you updated on that as we have any more information. Upcoming events, I won't go through those, but just again, Children's Fair is October 9th at the Target parking lot. End of my report.
Thank you. Any questions or comments for our manager? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to committee reports. Any supervisor wishes to expand on any of your reports that you have submitted? I will simply say that, well, first of all, there's a typo, Doug. The executive committee changed its meeting to tomorrow, so it should be August 19th, not August 17th. You may not have gotten that notice, but we're meeting tomorrow. And I'll also say, I didn't do a written report on the executive special meeting on August 10th because the only item was this position statement to Penn State on COVID-19, or, urging Penn State to mandate vaccinations for students. There was not a unanimous agreement on that, so it was referred to general forum. I will also say that I now know that the exec committee meeting tomorrow, College Township is proposing to add a short little statement to the proposed letter that was going to be presented to the general forum, that would then satisfy College Township, which was the municipality that did not agree to send the letter back during our August 10th meeting. So that's going to come up again for discussion in the morning. And it's possible that the exec committee may decide if there's a unanimous approval from the representatives from each of the municipalities, they may decide to go ahead and approve sending the letter and then just simply report to general forum as a matter of record that a letter was sent. So you'll find out in the general forum agenda whether you get to discuss it as a proposed letter to be sent from the general forum, or whether it's just simply a matter of record that a letter was already sent by the executive committee. Betsy, you have a comment or question?
I was just going to report, I submitted one report and another I didn't on climate. The solar power purchase agreement is going to need your approval to empower me to allow the State College Area School District to essentially hire this energy consultant. We'll be discussing it at the general forum, so you'll get an overview then, so I didn't see the point of doing it now. And then also just to give you a heads up that the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, the CAP, is going to move pretty quickly, and we'll need some action on that too. So that is, I'm excited to say that it's moving along. That's it.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. Last item, other business. Is there any other business? Anybody wish to present? Pam? You need to unmute yourself, Pam. There you go.
Thank you. I was approached by several community members, and I want to applaud partnership with Supervisor Patty Stevens. We single-handedly went after Megabus. Megabus stopped the route from State College to Philadelphia. which affected not only our communities, but the student population at Penn State. Without notice, they just stopped the route. I know that Supervisor Stevens contacted several media outlets and congressmen. We both wrote correspondence, and to our hard work and persistence, they finally decided to put the Philadelphia route back on in the fall. It affected not only the students, but from here to Philadelphia, a lot of our students and community members were catching flights out of Philadelphia. And to completely stop the route without letting the community know was major. So I would just like to applaud my colleague in Ferguson, Patty Stevens, for her hard work and support on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Yep. Thank you for your taking the initiative to work with her and helping to convince the megabus company to restore that route. Any other business? If not, I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded.
Betsy.
All in favor?
Betsy.
Aye.
Aye. Yay.
Motion carries. Thank you very much for sticking with us throughout this long meeting.